Hello. Hey, Alex. Hey,
Hey,
Anna.
how you doing?
Great. How are you?
Hanging in there.
Just hanging in there, huh?
Well, better than hanging in there, but I like that answer.
Yeah. Nice. It sounds kind of depressing to me, Alex. I'll be honest. It sounds like hanging in there sounds like somebody who's like, I don't know. It's like times are tough. They're kind of down. They're depressed, but they're still alive, and so they're answering in as nice a way as they can muster in that moment. But that doesn't sound like you at all.
No, it doesn't when you put it that way.
So you should definitely, Brianna, do you agree with me?
I agree.
Okay, because that's how when somebody says, when I ask how are you and somebody says hanging in there, I interpret it as like, whoa, this person's like seriously depressed and their life sucks.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's definitely not the situation. So
I'm glad to hear that. Relationship troubles. Do you want to talk about it? Should we turn this into a therapy session? I'm just kidding.
yeah, Brianna feels like she's gonna throw up all the time.
Hi, Mary from Indiana. Karen. Hi, Karen. Karen, I'm sorry that your name has been co-opted as an internet insult these days.
Oh. Karen and Kyle.
And Kyle too. Is that a thing? I haven't heard.
Kyle's the guy. It's the guy version is Kyle.
Geez, yeah, I know a lot of nice, very nice people named Karen, and I feel bad for them right now.
I know.
Name is being used in that way. Sorry, Karen. I apologize on behalf of all the people using that. I've never used it. Linda, okay, let's get started with some questions. Hi, Thalia or Talia. So Linda says, which option would be better if I want the benefits of both a sauna and a red near infrared light? A, purchase a good quality infrared sauna and purchase a separate Redrush 720, or B, purchase a good quality full spectrum sauna. My answer would be A. Almost universally, the full spectrum saunas kind of suck, to be honest with you, when it comes to their near infrared output. Almost universally, with a very few exceptions, they're just very, very underpowered when it comes to the near infrared part of what they're doing. And it's just not equivalent to what you'd get from a dedicated red or near infrared LED panel. So it's more of a marketing gimmick than anything else, to be honest with you. So I would say go for a sauna. That's a sauna that gets hot. That's where most of the benefits of a sauna will come from, and then get a separate red and near infrared light. Karen said, question for Ari. I set up a treadmill desk. I want to add NEAT. I also do 30 to 60 minutes on elliptical each day. So what speed for my desk treadmill? This is really a personal preference thing. Like throughout the day, there are times where I might be standing still if I need to like focus on something and read kind of uninterrupted. And there might be times where I'm like, let's say, watching something and I don't necessarily need to read small print or focus on typing or something to that effect. And I can walk at a faster pace. So you can alternate between walking at a faster pace, a slower pace, or standing still, depending on what you're specifically doing in that moment.
Ari, what pace do you walk on if you have to type?
So to be honest, I have no idea how to answer that. And the reason why is I have a manual treadmill, not an electrical treadmill. So my treadmill works as I power it, meaning like I don't turn it on to a particular, like I don't press buttons to turn it on to a particular speed. I can literally start moving it right now if I want to and stop as I wish without touching any buttons. Pros and cons to that situation. The pro is zero EMFs. And I did read quite a number of studies. Maybe you guys have seen these talking about like massive amounts of dirty electricity from treadmills. So if I was going to use it for hours and hours each day, I didn't want to be exposing my body to high amounts of EMFs. Just precautionary principle. Who knows what the effects are of 8 hours a day of EMF exposure from a treadmill. The downside of it is a manual treadmill requires it to be slanted. The one I have is like slanted at an incline. They also have what do they call them? The ones that are for sprinting, the really nice ones. I'm forgetting the brand. You guys are probably familiar with it. What the hell is that brand? Anyway, they're like treadmills that are kind of they're shaped almost like a banana shape.
Oh,
I've
You
seen
know what I'm
them.
talking
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so those are kind of like mine in the sense that they move as you walk, and they're not electrical at all. And that might be a better choice than what I have, because it allows you to be mostly flat, not on an incline. So anyway, long answer. Christine said to supplement with calcium or not to supplement with calcium. I'm so confused about this with all the varying options out there. I try to be dairy free. This is a good question for Alex and Brianna. I'm sure they've delved into this.
Oh, well, depending on where you're at, the RDA for calcium is about around 1 gram to 1,200 milligrams. And if you're not consuming any dairy, I don't necessarily think that calcium supplementation is required if you're eating the right types of leafy green vegetables. Kale, for example, because kale is a low oxalate vegetable, it's the bioavailability of calcium from kale is actually higher than that of milk. And so dairy is an excellent source without any doubt, but there's a lot of very good sources from leafy greens too, where if you're eating, I can't give you a list other than kale off the top of my head, but that it's easy to obtain it in the diet from plants. You could also try mineral waters like Gerolsteiner. That's a favorite of ours.
That one does. Not all mineral waters have high calcium content, but that one does. So that's why I picked that one over the other ones.
And then the other part of that is to just try and keep it in balance with your magnesium. Ideally, you'd want to shoot for a 2-to-1 ratio, give or take. So if you're getting 1,000 milligrams of calcium, aim for 500 milligrams of magnesium, which is easy, again, to do with plants because magnesium is actually the central metal that makes up chlorophyll. And so magnesium is abundant in pretty much every plant.
Mm-hmm. I'll also shout out to a topic we were talking about last session, which is sardines. Sardines, when you eat them with the bone in, also a great source of calcium as well. Mary, if there's a day you know you will not be moving much, like example, a travel day or long day meetings, should you cut back your protein for that day or continue with the same? So I'll answer first, and then I think Alex and Brianna might maybe have a different take than me. I would say you could potentially keep protein the same, but I would cut back calories overall, and in particular carbs and fats on the days where you're moving less. But I would keep protein relatively high still. But curious what Brianna and Alex have to say.
Yeah, it's the same gist. I mean, honestly, if you don't eat as much protein on a day, or there's just some given day for whatever reason you don't hit your protein goal, it's not going to kill you. Like, don't stress over that type of thing. But yeah, generally speaking, protein is kind of the one nutrient that stays stable, and then you modify your carbs and fats to stay in line with your calorie needs.
Chelsea said, since the increased protein intake, I presume I'm feeling very full and bloated. The full part is good, the bloated part not so good, and elimination does not seem to be as efficient, which is concerning. Strategies around this. So more water consumption, and then you can experiment with things like increased fiber intake, plant foods, veggies, as well as chia seed water. So water like the gelled chia seeds in water, drinking some of that. It's kind of magic for some people. And then potentially also experimenting with things like magnesium citrate, vitamin C supplementation to help as needed. But did you guys have one or two more suggestions on constipation?
Yeah.
well, not necessarily for constipation, but if she's feeling bloated from the protein, that usually regulates itself. It's usually coming from a low protein diet. Your enzymes are downregulated, and that'll level out after a while of being on the diet. You could add digestive enzymes if you would like, but it'll eventually upregulate anyways.
Nice. Lori said, "Where's the chat cat?" Alex and Brian.
They're sleeping.
Christine, for all of you, what are your typical sources of protein throughout the day? I'm trying to figure out a different creative ways to get my protein, to increase my protein intake without getting tired of eating the same thing. So I'll give you like my last 3 meals off the top of my head. This morning I had a smoothie bowl with plant protein powder in it, as well as nuts and seeds and spirulina and things like that. Then I had eggs and chicken liver. Tonight I might have something like salmon or shrimp or sardines. So that's like maybe a typical day for me as far as protein sources. Maybe an alternative for dinner might be something like a tempeh salad with a huge amount of tempeh on it. So, and maybe like sweet potatoes, something like that. What you guys want to give? Maybe some of your typical protein sources.
Yeah, I eat the same thing every day. I don't need a lot of variety. That's something that I do think a lot of people when they're dieting need to work on, is not focusing so much on having huge variety of foods. I eat a lot of eggs, egg whites, plant protein powder. Usually I'll have meat a few times a week, but it's not every day. Fat-free dairy, I eat a lot of that too.
For me, I'm also pretty consistent. My breakfast will be based around eggs that I like to, basically just whole eggs with either some form of fish or another source of meat. Traditionally, it's been sardines, but recently it's been little chicken sausages because, I don't know, they're just really good. I can't give them up yet. And then lunch will be usually some protein powder mixed in a big bowl of oat bran with berries and potatoes. And dinner will be another giant like grain and legume bowl, usually quinoa and black beans with a bunch of vegetables, and then some form of lean meat like chicken or some type of white fish. But that's pretty typical for me too, is seafood, poultry, and eggs make up most of my protein intake, and then some whey protein powder. I'm not big on, I try to eat red meat a couple times a week, but I honestly, I normally fail in that regard. I might have bison once a week. And then I don't consume much dairy outside of some whey protein in my oat bran.
Nice. Well, we have, I'm surprised to learn that we actually have shockingly similar dietary patterns. I didn't know you guys were into sardines. I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah, well, it's a learned taste, right? Mm-hmm. And here's the funny thing, Ari, is that given all of us are what I would consider very knowledgeable in the health field, kind of gives an indication to what I would perceive as a healthy diet. I think that a very plant-heavy diet where the protein comes, if anything, from seafood and then possibly dairy and eggs, is like a Mediterranean diet, so to speak, mm-hmm. is going to get the best outcomes because it gives you all of the benefits of plants while still allowing you to have some very high quality bioavailable sources of protein. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the way I try to, when people ask me what my diet is, I kind of describe it as like a hybrid between Mediterranean and paleo. Exactly. It's like it's super plant rich, almost like sort of like a really healthy vegan template, like with a bunch of protein piled on that vegan template. Yep. Yeah. Sometimes I joke that I'm a carnivorous rabbit. Nice. Okay. Catherine said, speaking of sauna, any feedback on Vital Health Sauna in San Diego? Never heard of them. So I'll while we're answering one of the next questions, I'll look them up. But yes, I live in San Diego, but I've never heard of Vital Health Sauna.
Lena, I have a question. It says consuming 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of protein per day is ideal if you're overweight or obese and trying to lose some fat mass. I'm assuming, 1, you decrease this as your weight also decreases, but please confirm. And 2, you should be consuming grams of protein based on your ideal body weight. Alex, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so yeah, technically you could reduce your protein intake as you lose weight, but I think that just adds an extra layer of complexity that doesn't need to be done. I think if you're overweight or obese, you set your protein based on your current body weight because that's what most of the scientific research does. And then you just eat that until you've obtained what I would consider a healthy body weight, where your BMI is around 25. And then you would want to, at that point, especially if you're implementing the exercise habits laid out in the blueprint, like resistance training, then you would probably want to think about staying up at that upper end range of 1.6 and possibly going higher the leaner that you get. And if you think about it too, if you're eating, for example, like let's say 1.4 grams per kilogram when you're overweight, as you lose fat mass, your protein requirements might go up to, let's say, 1.8 grams per kilogram. But because you weigh less, it actually ends up being the same absolute amount of protein intake.
Nice. There's a website. So I'm on the question about Vital Health saunas. There's a website called, one second, I'll find it. Infrared sauna. It's called, crap, I'm not finding it. But there's a website. It's like dedicated to reviewing infrared saunas, and it's this one guy who basically has done like super in-depth reviews, very detailed reviews of tons of different brands of infrared saunas. And he's, provided information on, how hot they get, the type of heater, the quality of the electrical stuff, the quality of the wood construction, the levels of EMFs and ELFs, and so on. And he provides these really detailed reviews on all these different brands. So if you have a question on a specific brand, I would look to see if this guy has done a review on it. He also is unbiased. He's not affiliated with any particular brand. And, many brands have reached out to him to try to say, hey, I'll give you money if you promote my brand above the others. And he does not make those kind of partnerships. But what I will tell you is he's done some interesting surveys with sort of infrared sauna owners in general, and something like 65 or 68% of people who buy an infrared sauna regret purchasing that particular brand. And there's a lot. My point is, there's a lot of infrared sauna brands that make kind of junky saunas, either poor wood quality construction or materials that off gas or high EMFs or something to that effect. So it is, if you're going to make a purchase and you're going to spend several $1,000s, it really is worth making sure you get a quality brand and making sure it's a good purchase and not something you're going to regret. I'll tell you, I've purchased an infrared sauna. The first purchase I ever made was an infrared sauna, and the first sauna purchase I ever made was an infrared sauna. And I had only up until that point experienced traditional saunas. And then I kind of was hearing about how wonderful infrared saunas were and how they were so much better than traditional saunas. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll get an infrared sauna since everybody says they're better. And I got an infrared sauna and I didn't sweat in the damn thing. It didn't get hot enough for me to even sweat in it. So it wasn't even much of a sauna experience for me. So, that's the kind of thing. And I spent $4,000 on it. And then I ended up selling it on Craigslist for, I think, like $2,500. And so it was a big loss of money for me because I made the mistake of not getting one that gets hot enough for me to actually feel like I'm in a sauna. So that's one of many things to be aware of when it comes to buying a sauna. But I'll look more when we're answering other questions and find that site. It's something like Infrared Sauna Reviews or Infrared Sauna Institute, something like that. I'll find it. But yeah, be advised. Like, be careful where you get your sauna from. Catherine, if it's Matt Justice, he hasn't reviewed. Speaking of the sauna, no, I don't think it's that one. Might be. There's another guy. Be aware, there's another guy online on YouTube who does reviews on YouTube, who is a charlatan, who basically is affiliated with one brand and just does nasty reviews of all the other brands that are not the brand that he's affiliated with, and misrepresents a lot of things. So there are people on YouTube doing that. Be aware of that too. There's one guy who has a website dedicated to saunas who does really unbiased reviews. Selena, I've been doing Bright Line Eating with Susan Pierce Thompson for almost 3 years. I'm struggling with maintaining BLE portion control. I work out 6 hours a week with very intensely, and I'm a chiropractor, so I don't just sit. I saw your program and thought this might help with the last 10 pounds, wondering if this is my body trying to hold muscle mass. I would love to lose the last 10 without compromising my workouts. Also a vegetarian for all my life. I don't do protein drinks based on BLE, not recommending. Nervous about changing habits because I've lost 60 pounds with BLE, but I'd like to finish off the last 10 pounds. My thoughts, personally, it sounds like to me, you've almost identified your problem yourself. You have, I think, so first of all, we in this program do not agree with avoidance of protein powders. I think that is just, it's not supported by the actual evidence. There's an abundance of evidence showing that they support satiety, they support muscle mass, they have various benefits. So if my question would be, if you are avoiding protein powders, what is the science supporting your reason for doing that? I don't believe there is good science to support that decision. And there is an obvious sort of low hanging fruit here, which is, you're trying to lose your last 10 pounds. You're struggling with portion control. Protein can help with portion control. And you can accomplish that very simply by just letting go of the, sort of dogmatic avoidance of protein powders as if they're bad for you, and embracing that and using it to your advantage to increase your satiety. And if you don't want to use protein powder still, fine. You can try to get protein from whole foods. The challenge is, if you're also a vegetarian, the high protein sources within vegetarian intake are also going to be high in calories overall, high in carbs, most likely. And that's going to make it challenging. So you've kind of set up the rules of the game here for yourself in a way that is hindering your own success. That would be my analysis. But Alex, Brianna, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I think that you summed it up well. I think it's important to point out that the entire goal of Bright Line Eating is to overcome food addictions and help people with that. The entire goal of this program is to help you lose the last 10 pounds and to set you up for lifelong fat loss. And so there are a lot of overlap with the recommendations for doing both of those things, but there are also certain key differences, and you have to decide what your goal is. Do you still have trouble with food that you need to overcome, that where following Bright Line Eating might be the better option right now? Or do you feel that you have a good handle on that and you are ready to move on from that template and combine it with our recommendations to get the best of both worlds?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, some flexibility of thinking and sort of your rules around food intake is required for experimentation with new ideas. And there are certain kinds of experimentation that are, especially for Bright Line eaters, very dangerous. For example, if we said, hey, I want you to try integrating a cheat day once a week where you binge on pizza and ice cream and donuts, right? that is a very dangerous kind of experimentation to play around with. If we say, hey, I think you should try to consume a bit more protein and consider integrating protein powders into your routine, that, in my view, carries basically zero risk of any potential negative consequence. So, hopefully you get what we mean by that.
Real quick, I also do just want to add that your question is basically sums up what many of the Bright Line eaters were worried about when they first joined the program, when we launched it. And now that about 2 weeks or so have gone by, I think we can say confidently that many of them did decide to give a protein powder a try, and they have not had any problems at all. And they've seen great success with it in terms of reducing their appetite and leading to changes in their body composition that they perceive as favorable.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe there's a bit more to be said on this, just for clarification, in case people haven't come across some of our previous answers here. But the thinking that, protein powder is like flour and has a similar effect on the brain to like refined grains or flour or sugar or something like that. Just because whey protein powder looks in some way to sugar does not mean that it is affecting your body in any way like sugar. So the reality is it does not affect the pleasure centers of the brain in the same way. It does not affect your body composition in the same way. It does not affect your gut microbiome or your hormones in the same way. It does not have any of the same effects. So whey protein powder is akin to the effects of eating shrimp or eating fish or eating chicken, not eating ice cream or donuts or cookies. So very, very important to understand that. Also important to break free of the dogma that, anything processed in some way is bad for you. I could point to a million things that are technically processed. For example, spirulina powder or pomegranate powder or acai powder or any number of things like that technically go through some degree of processing and are dried into some powder that we know from lots and lots of research are unequivocally beneficial to the human body and not harmful. So if you have a belief that says, and a paradigm of the world and of nutrition that says anything that is processed is harmful, then you need to readdress that. We obviously agree that certain kinds of processed foods are extremely harmful, unquestionably. Donuts and cookies and cake and pizza and ice cream are harmful, but it's not, just because something is processed doesn't mean that it's donuts and pizza and ice cream, right? Spirulina does not equal ice cream and donuts. They're totally different as far as their effects on the human body. One is very good for you, one is very bad for you. So it's really important to address excessively dogmatic and inflexible thinking that is leading you to make bad conclusions about things. Catherine, so is there evidence for the set point theory? Do you guys want to address that? I feel like I'm talking too much here, so maybe you guys want to
you never talk too much. Yeah, there is. The set point theory was probably the dominating theory ever since the 1950s, the mid 1950s to even the current day. It's one of the dominating theories. And while we have some evidence to suggest that the set point, as it was originally described, it doesn't work that way, because environmental influences like the reward value of food do impact our body composition and do impact where that set point can be found in terms of body weight. Our body weight is definitely internally regulated, and it is primarily focused on preventing weight loss, because in the wild, we didn't have an obesity epidemic. In the wild, we had a starvation problem. And so our bodies are really good at fighting biology, and that's pretty much the fundamental basis of what we talk about in this program, because everything we recommend, like circadian rhythms, simple dietary changes like eating more protein, doing resistance training to build a foundation of muscle mass, all of these things, I don't want to use the word trick, but I'm going to. They essentially trick your body into lowering its set point so that you can achieve a lower amount of fat mass without your body thinking that it's starving. And it is 100% based in science. The set point does exist. And we also know today that it's completely modifiable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To me, this question like, yes, there's a lot of lines of evidence supporting this. There's, the Minnesota starvation study, and there's a million different sort of lines of evidence we could point to. But there's also a sort of common sense, real world experience that we all have of this. It's, to me, so this question is sort of like, is there any evidence that our bodies maintain a particular blood oxygen saturation? Okay, well, like, hold your breath for the next minute, and then let me know if your body engages in any sort of fight against you trying to lower your blood oxygen levels and brings it back up to the level that it was at before you started holding your breath, right? And so we know there's a really good quote from obesity researcher Rudolf Leibel, who, he says it very eloquently, but he says, on the surface, weight loss is just this very obvious, simple problem. Like, we know that if you take somebody who normally consumes and burns 2,000 calories a day, and you force them to eat only 500 calories a day, they'll lose lots of weight very predictably. But just as predictably as they lose that weight, as soon as you stop forcing them to do that, and they're allowed to eat however much they feel inclined to eat, they will immediately go back up to their previous weight, right? So it's the same thing with breath holding. It's the same thing. It's like asking, is there any evidence to show that if, depriving my body of sleep, if I stay up all night, that I'll sleep more the next day? Well, try it. See if you sleep more, you probably will. And so that we have lots of different kinds of homeostatic regulatory mechanisms to regulate all kinds of systems of our body. And body fat regulation is one of them. I mean, the very existence of all animal species who can maintain their body weight pretty much stably for years without ever having any knowledge of what a calorie is, or modulating sort of knowingly modulating their calorie intake or calorie expenditure in any way, tells you that this is true. And if you try and starve an animal, you'll see that they're suffering. And then if you give them access to food, they'll eat enough to go back up to their previous weight, right? So there's lots and lots of evidence and very common sense observations that lead us to this conclusion. The more tricky element of this is there evidence to show that the set point can be raised over time to a new higher set point, and then can be successfully lowered back down to a lower set point in a sustainable way. And Alex addressed that too. And we do have evidence pointing in that direction as well, but it's certainly not necessarily easy to do, but that's what this program is designed for. Catherine, can I do alternate day fasting if I have hypothyroidism? You guys have thoughts on that?
Well, if you have hypothyroidism, then you should be medicated for it. And the thing with exogenous hormones is they override any natural impact you would have. Yeah, you can do alternate day fasting while you have low thyroid function. The biggest issue with thyroid isn't the fasting per se, it's under eating. And if your goal is to diet, then that's unfortunately kind of necessary if you want to lose fat. Do you have anything?
Yeah. Every time I diet, I usually have to increase my thyroid hormones, and I test them when I'm dieting for that reason. And then after I'm done dieting and when I'm on maintenance, I go back down. So it's just something you have to accept and work with, I guess.
Brandon, do you have hypothyroidism?
Of course. No. Yes. Yes, we both do.
Really? Alex, you do too?
Yep.
Jeez.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know like what brought it about. It could have been an adaptive mechanism from years of dieting and being at unhealthily low body weights. I know that Brianna spent years being at like the low teens for a woman, and I spent 2 to 3 years maintaining around 5 to 6% body fat. And I think that I do think it's completely, yeah. And once I regained weight, but for both of us, it didn't return to normal. And I do think it's just an adaptive mechanism by the body, kind of like a starvation memory. where it says we can't make your thyroid increase because you spent so much time in a perceived famine that this is just a fail-safe.
Interesting. It's also interesting I think to look at like trends in the population. I think the incidence of hypothyroidism has gone up a lot in the last few decades, and probably several reasons for that. But I would guess probably environmental toxicants is one factor, and
chlorine too. Like I don't use any kind of chlorine. I don't shower in it, like bathe in it, swim in it, nothing.
Yeah, a lot of the halogens are really probably clogging people up as far as
that's true. There's some epidemiological data looking at like fluoride in the drinking water and sort of regional differences in the incidence of hypothyroidism depending on how much fluoride is in the tap water of that area. I saw an interesting study recently that was looking at body temperature, like tracking human body temperature over the last several decades, and they've shown that the average body temperature of humans has actually declined in I think by like a full degree or degree and a half in the last several decades, which is interesting.
That PFAS too.
Yeah, I think oh man, and I just forgot what I was gonna say. Oh, I think it's an extra, like it's a tough issue too for anyone that is carrying around some excess weight, because a lot of these toxicants are stored in fat tissue. And so then you, once you start dieting, then they're going to be released at an accelerated rate quicker than the body can detoxify it, unless you take specific like precautions to bolster liver function and do that type of thing. Yeah. And I think that just the modern environment kind of screwed over humans in a lot of ways.
On that note of what you were just saying there, I will mention I have a friend who's a pediatric neurologist, and she told me something really interesting that she's noticed in several patients now, that some patients where they lose a huge amount of weight very rapidly, like 80, 100 pounds that's lost in the span of like a few months, and right after that period, they come down with neurological symptoms. So they get a diagnosis of MS, or they get a diagnosis of some other neurological condition. And her theory was exactly what you're getting at, that basically you have this huge release of all these stored toxicants that are being dumped into the bloodstream faster than they can be cleared, and that are in many cases neurotoxic. So something to be aware of for people losing weight is the need to support detoxification pathways during this process as well. Melanie said, I've always been taught to eat fat, fiber, carbs, and protein together at every meal to balance blood sugar. If combining moderate amounts of fat and carbs doesn't make me overeat, is it okay or good to combine them? Alex is your man to answer this one.
Well, theoretically, no. I think protein should be eaten at every meal with whatever other nutrients you're eating at that meal, for reasons that are irrelevant to blood sugar regulation. But when it comes to fat and carbs together, that there isn't a very strong, or I shouldn't say not as strong, but there's a very myopic scientific explanation for that recommendation. And it's because fat blunts the spike in blood glucose that occurs when you eat your carbohydrates. But what isn't mentioned is that the spike might be smaller, but your body needs to use more insulin, and your body stays in a state of hyperglycemia and hyperinsulinemia for a longer period of time, which, in my opinion, is far more detrimental, because you never actually...
Sort of like this is reminding me of the area under the curve with lockdowns versus no lockdowns.
Yeah, exactly. Your body's really good at regulating, in general, your body's really good at regulating blood sugar. And so if you have a spike in blood sugar, you'll secrete insulin. It'll come back down in 30 to 60 minutes. You're good to go, unless you have some form of insulin resistance. But if you combine fat with it, regardless of whether you have insulin resistance or not, because this has been shown in both healthy adults, and it's even worse in people with type 2 diabetes, you just have excessive hyperglycemia that you might not get a spike up to like 160, but you're going to be sitting at 100 to 120 for 3 times as long. And I just personally don't think that that's, I think it's better to have a temporary spike than to sit in low grade chronic. Yeah. And it does that at every meal. And so that's the theoretical basis for that recommendation, is because their combination causes a transient state of insulin resistance that mimics diabetes. So it's in an ideal world. You don't want to do that. But yeah, the main issue is hyperpalatability, because, I mean, if you have to endure a little insulin resistance to ultimately lose fat and resolve any actual pathologies that are going on, then I would totally support that. And so if combining them gets you to stick to a reduced calorie diet where you're going to ultimately lose fat, then I say go for it. But in ideals, separating them makes your meals less palatable. It makes you just get less interested in eating, so you have satiety come about sooner. And it also benefits blood sugar regulation.
That's an absolutely excellent answer, and better than I could have answered on those fronts. I want to add just a bit of big picture context to this question as well, which is if you're finding that your blood sugar levels are easily upset from, any sort of minor variations in what you're eating in that meal, or that you have blood sugar swings if you don't eat every 2 or 3 hours or something like that, the bigger picture problem of your blood sugar dysregulation is not just the macronutrient ratios of the meals, but it's likely poor metabolic health overall and poor metabolic flexibility. And so as you improve your metabolic health, as you improve metabolic flexibility, which comes from a combination of doing a lot of the strategies we're recommending in this program, comes from experimenting with different kinds of hormesis in particular, and losing body fat as well. And kind of training your body to be able to switch back and forth between carbs and fats as the fuel source. And as you do that effectively, your body should learn how to keep stable blood sugar levels a lot better. And you shouldn't find yourself so easily disrupted by, whatever the specifics of that meal were. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I do. And to add one more piece to that, I would say also look at what foods you're eating, because everyone has foods. Like it's not a blanket statement. Not everyone does good with oatmeal, for example. Some people do excellent with cookies. We have actual studies showing that some people get glucose spikes from eating tomatoes, but not cookies, based on their own personal physiology and their microbiome.
I wish I did really well with cookies. I cookies.
Right. And so if you find yourself like getting uneasy after eating a meal with some carbohydrates in it, then I think it's important to look at the carbohydrate sources that you're eating and to maybe consider some alternatives and see how you do. As one example, Brianna cannot eat the very, very delicious Japanese sweet potatoes with the purple skin and the white center, because
you're missing out.
Yeah, they send her blood glucose through the roof.
Wow.
Like 160, and it stays up there. But she can eat oat bran, like never-ending amounts of oat bran, and her blood glucose just doesn't even change above fasting levels. And so it's going to take a little self-experimentation in that regard to figure out what works best for you.
Christine said, do we need to soak most nuts for digestive reasons? I've heard different perspectives. Yeah, I've changed my perspectives over the years on this. So I used to be, sort of very strict on soaking and sprouting and things of that nature. And I've gotten less rigid in my thinking on that over the years. And I'm not convinced that it's a super important thing to do. Though I don't think if you like doing it and you find personally your physiology does better with it, I think it's a perfectly fine thing to do. I'm looking at you guys to see if you have any thoughts to add on that.
I guess I just want to mention phytic acid, because that's usually the big one that people are like, oh no, nuts has phytic acid, and sprouting helps reduce that. But phytic acid is turns out to be like an incredibly beneficial compound for our intestinal health, like potent
And anti-cancer.
activity. Yeah, potent anti-cancer activity. I mean, I personally, for both the phytic acid as well as the vitamin E, I try to have like 2 handfuls of almonds or hazelnuts every day. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that because I think there's a huge misunderstanding on phytic acid.
Yeah, I mean that a big part of the reasoning to avoid these foods or avoid legumes and things of that nature was like, oh, the phytic acid, it binds minerals and prevents your body from absorbing minerals. And that's true to some extent. It's also true that phytic acid has all these amazing health benefits, as you mentioned. So assuming your diet is otherwise sufficient in minerals, that issue becomes a non-issue. And then the phytic acid then allows you to get a lot of these other health benefits, and is not something to, they used to be labeled as anti-nutrients, right? Which sounds really bad. It's like, oh, I got to avoid anti-nutrients. Well, it turns out that anti-nutrient is actually pretty good for your body. So
yeah, I did that for years too. I find them hyper palatable when they're sprouted too, so I would eat more. So that's something to keep in mind too.
mm-hmm.
Oh, better yet, roasted and salted.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Chelsea, I was surprised to hear that melatonin is okay to use long term. What's the best dose, and would it be beneficial to cycle on and off? And if so, how many days on and off? Alex, you want to take this? You're the melatonin maestro.
Melatonin's an interesting one. And my personal stance on it has changed through various conversations with Ari, as well as just reading comments he makes on posts. I think that you, Ari, take a really good position on it. And I think that both Ari and myself would agree that melatonin supplementation is pretty amazing, especially when you look at the clinical literature. But from a practical standpoint, it does come with some drawbacks, and you have to ask yourself what the goal is you're trying to achieve. Like, do you have cancer? Because studies show 60 to 100 milligrams could have benefits. And in that case, if you wake up feeling groggy every morning, it might be worth it. But for many people, for example, in postmenopausal women and overweight and obese adults, several clinical trials have shown that 6 to 10 milligrams per day reduces oxidative stress and inflammation. And so it might be worthwhile to do that, especially if you have high levels of metabolic dysfunction. But if you're just generally healthy, like Ari is, or myself, then the benefits are much more theoretical in nature. And if higher doses end up impairing your sleep, like it does with some individuals, or it has you waking up feeling groggy, I don't necessarily believe that supplementation is worth reduced quality sleep, because even though you would theoretically get higher levels of melatonin through supplementation than you would through sleep, sleep does a lot more than just lead to the secretion of melatonin. And so it's kind of about asking, what is it the goal you want to achieve? And as far as an ideal dose, I personally think that it's best for everyone to start with 500 micrograms to 1 milligram to see how they do. And if their goal is to get some of the benefits of higher doses, then I would say increase by 500 micrograms every 3 days or so until you reach a dose that you notice impairs your sleep or makes you feel groggy, and stick at the dose right below that. So that way you don't have the adverse effects. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I want to mention, just for people who didn't quite catch what Alex said there, make sure you understand the difference between micrograms and milligrams. They're two different measurements that he was mentioning there. There's 1,000 micrograms per milligram. And so when he's saying increase the dose by 500 micrograms, that's 0.5 milligram, 0.5 milligram. So, and Alex has done amazing research on this. He knows a huge amount, and he was actually instrumental in sharing a lot of the research with me on this. And then we kind of jointly worked on some stuff together around melatonin and mitochondria specifically. The research is so amazing and impressive. When I read the research, it makes me want to use 50 milligrams a night. It's like, oh my God, this stuff is amazing. Like I want to just dump huge amounts into my body. But when I started experimenting with it, even a 3 milligram dose or a 5 milligram dose, but even a 3 milligram dose profoundly disturbed my sleep and like basically caused me to be up all night. So I found through experimentation that a dose around 0.2 or 0.3 milligrams is a dose that allows me to actually, it improves my sleep and allows me to get a little extra melatonin in my system.
I'll add to that too, that just as a reference point, to give you an idea of how meaningful even such a seemingly low dose is, 0.3 milligrams, which is 300 micrograms, causes the same melatonin curve that you would see in a young adult through normal sleep. So by just supplementing that small dose, you're essentially doubling your overnight melatonin production. So it's still a very, very meaningful dose. It's not like it's a waste of time or money. Like it's still very, very meaningful.
Yeah, in that sense, it's kind of actually bizarre to me that, you know, we've ended up using, it's common in the supplement industry to have supplements at 3 milligrams, 5 milligrams, 10 or 15 milligrams. And the research goes up to, 80 or 100 milligrams a day. It's interesting just that they're even, when you understand what a physiological dose is, what our body normally produces, it's like we're talking about many, many orders of magnitude, greater than that. And there is, Brianna, you'd probably know more about this, but there's some potential consequence of using really high dose. I think it's around estrogen metabolism, if I remember correctly, but there's some potential consequence or side effect there.
Yeah, it can. But a lot of athletic women, like, they don't sleep unless they take like 10 milligrams, and it doesn't make them groggy. And so I don't really understand the full interaction. I don't think anyone does, because I can't find any research on it completely with athletic women. But it definitely, like, higher doses seem to help with PCOS
and there's some studies I've seen. I don't know the average age of the women, but I've seen at least 2 studies with women specifically where they use pretty high dose of melatonin, I think around 10 milligrams, and they showed improved fat loss outcomes specifically.
Yeah, that's menopausal women.
Okay,
that's what those studies are done on.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I don't know the mechanism either, but based on memory, melatonin interacts with estrogen metabolism, and in premenopausal women, like young women, it can shift the cycle by several days if they take it regularly. And so that scares a lot of women because, for example, they'll start supplementing melatonin, suddenly their period doesn't come when it's supposed to. And it's just like, you just need to hold out a couple more days because it probably shifted your cycle back a little bit.
Interesting.
Really
do you guys have any, sorry, what was that, Brian?
I don't think any of the scientists understand why. They just have ideas of why it happens. But
Gotcha.
I think that it's all intertwined with why people with PCOS benefit so much from such a high dose, because they're usually not having a period anyways.
Gotcha.
Yeah, they're low in estrogen, and so this helps balance that.
Yeah. And do you guys have any thoughts on cycling on and off? My inclination would just be to use a low enough dose that you don't, like, you find a sweet spot. This is what I did personally. You kind of find a sweet spot where you notice improvements in your sleep and little to no negative effect of like grogginess or obviously disrupted sleep. And, kind of find that sweet spot and stay at it for the most part. But I don't know. My understanding of the literature that's looked at negative feedback loops, the potential that, exogenous supplementary melatonin disrupts your own internal production of melatonin, is that the research shows that it does not suppress internal production of melatonin. However, I will say that anecdotally, my experience and the reports I've heard from many, many people does not really support that. Like, my experience is if I use like a 3 milligram dose or even a 1 milligram dose for several nights, and then I go to sleep the next night without using it, I'll have a crappy night of sleep. And it does seem like something's off. Maybe, I don't know if it's less melatonin or it disrupted something, but but my sleep is bad for 1 or 2 nights after coming off the melatonin, and then it resets.
I wonder if it has to do with receptor density. Like maybe certain, like I strongly believe, and I don't think there's any research on this, but I strongly believe that an explanation for the differences in supplementation sensitivity is that people have different densities of melatonin receptors on different organs. And so, and that's why some people get a more pronounced effect from supplementation than others, because they might have more receptors on that area. So a lower dose has a greater effect. And that could, and then down regulation of those receptors with regular supplementation, even if it doesn't impact your normal levels that you produce, once you go off it, your normal levels are no longer sufficient because of that down regulation, and that could explain the poor sleep.
Interesting. So do you guys agree with my take on cycling on and off, or do you think cycling on and off is a good idea?
No, I don't see any purpose. I think that melatonin is like creatine in the sense that, well, creatine builds up in your body, so maybe it's not like that, but it just provides a consistent benefit every night. Like the reason we secrete melatonin is to do a bunch of amazing stuff to our body overnight and really kickstart the repair and regeneration process. So you want to have that effect every night. So, and if it's not negatively impacting your own production, even if it might affect receptor downregulation, which is purely hypothetical on my part, I don't see a reason to go off of it.
Nice. Brianna, how many eggs do you eat usually in one day? 3 dozen, right?
Right. 2 to 3, depending on if I'm dieting or not. I'll eat 2 if I'm dieting. And then sometimes if I miss eggs, I'll supplement with choline.
Nice. Lori, would you please talk about the alternate day intermittent fasting with fasting all day until a protein-centric dinner, and if that meal is supposed to be just about 500 calories? I understand protein-centered, but what else? I'm thinking of 2 days a week, a protein shake, and some nuts with leafy greens and non-starchy veggies. I'm whole food plant-based, no soy, no gluten eater. Start next day with regular breakfast. Alex, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so this is actually coming from a recommendation that I've made to several women that are struggling to increase their activity level any more than they can. They're maintaining on a relatively low amount of calories, like 12 to 1400 calories per day, and they're maintaining at that. So if we're going to create a calorie deficit that's sustainable, I personally don't think, and they aren't able to increase their activity up to like 2000 calories or whatever. I don't think it's sustainable to have them say, okay, well, let's start eating 800 calories per day for the foreseeable future. I just don't. So what I've recommended is to possibly consider doing a modified alternate day fast, where for 2 to 3 times out of the week, they just end up skipping all but one meal, normally dinner, because that'll help with sleep and it'll help with maintaining social interactions usually. And at that dinner, they just aim to eat all the protein that they would normally. That doesn't mean they need to hit that goal, but it should be protein focused, and then fill up with fibrous vegetables while keeping sources of fat and sources of starchy carbohydrate to a minimum. And what this does is you might end up only eating 500 or 600 calories at that one meal, because you're going to get full from the one meal on, let's say, 3 days per week. Well, if you're maintaining on 1400 calories and you eat normally all the other days, and then you're creating roughly, almost a 3000 calorie deficit over the course of a week just by restricting on 3 days and eating normally the other 4 days. And so that would set you up for almost a pound of fat loss per week in theory. And it doesn't run into the risk of nutrient deficiencies because you're not restricting chronically over the week. I think that it's more sustainable psychologically, because it's a lot easier to eat normal one day and then the next day you just kind of headstrong into it and only plan on eating one meal, but then you get a break and you get to eat regularly again. And so that's kind of where that recommendation comes from, is that I think it's better to create an extreme calorie deficit a couple times per week than chronically restrict with a moderate deficit if you are operating on very low calorie budget because for whatever reason you're having trouble increasing your flux.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very well said. Carmen's asking about the 6 levels of habits. It should be in a document. Off the top of my head, I don't know which specific
18
document.
lesson 18.
Okay, putting it all together.
Yeah, we talk about all those habits, Carmen, in lesson 18. So
okay.
If you haven't finished yet, then that's why you haven't seen it, but it's in there.
Okay. Christine, what's the difference between oatmeal and oat bran? Why do you prefer oat bran?
Okay, so
I eat oatmeal. Just I've actually never had oat bran in my life. I always thought it was like something that maybe you put a little bit on of like other food that you eat, but like I wasn't familiar with the idea of like eating like a bowl of oat bran specifically.
Oh,
before
okay.
we even met.
Sure.
Yeah, we both ate it before we even like talked to each other. So it's funny that that's our like
you're meant for each other.
Right. It's
you guys
higher
can
in
share
beta
thyroid
glucan.
hormones too.
I know, right? The same. We think the same too. It's higher in beta glucan, higher in fiber, lower in fat. Right.
Yeah, the way I think we both got started into it is that I wanted to try it one time. So I did, but then I started obsessing over it because it tastes really good. It has a much more nuttier flavor, and it's a lot easier to mix things in because it forms more of a porridge than oatmeal. Kind of like cream of wheat, if anyone's had that, or cream of rice. It forms that consistency, so it's really easy to mix in a bunch of yummies. And then I started obsessing to like try and justify my choice to choose it over oatmeal because at the time I was still in the mindset of oatmeal being better because it's the entire grain rather than just the bran. So then when I looked at all the nutritional data, it turns out oat bran's higher in every mineral and nutrient that's in oat bran, while also being higher in fiber and higher in beta glucan. And so I kind of just said to myself, oat bran's like the best of the oatmeal world, and since I like the way it tastes more, I'm gonna just keep using it.
Yeah, this is another example, by the way, for people listening, of something that is technically processed, but it's not necessarily bad for you, and in fact is quite good for you. Christine, already answered that one. By the way, I did find that sauna site that I was referring to. It's called infraredsaunafoundation.org. infraredsaunafoundation.org. Great site. And you can also do like Google searches for a specific, you know what? It's the only downside of the site that I've found is he doesn't have an easily searchable tool to actually find specific brands, specific reviews of specific brands. So you can try just doing Google searches for the brand name and Infrared Sauna Foundation. And a lot of them will come up when you do that. Melanie is asking me what I eat in a typical day. So I mentioned this earlier, but real quick, I would say, I'll give you like my dinner last night was like a big tempeh salad. So a very large amount of tempeh on top of a bunch of greens and sweet potatoes and nuts and seeds and things like that mixed in. And then this morning I had a smoothie bowl, and then for lunch I had eggs and liver. A typical other lunch for me might be sardines or wild Alaskan salmon and some greens, some kimchi, sauerkraut, something like that, with some sort of carb. So something like either sweet potatoes or oatmeal, or I've been having some sourdough bread with avocado lately, things like that. And Alex and Brianna already mentioned some of their typical food, so I won't repeat everything. Lena, what plant-based protein do you recommend / use at home? I use several different ones. I use just a Nutribiotic brown rice protein. I use plain pea protein, and then there's a new one that I've experimented with that I didn't even know existed until like a couple months ago, which is almond protein. So they make an almond protein powder now. I think it's relatively expensive compared to some of the others. And then there's I use hemp protein also. I kind of rotate through the different options, but the tastiest one that's a blend that I use is a Garden of Life protein powder. That's sort of a mix of pea protein and several others. Tastes very nice, very overpriced for what it is, but pleasant tasting for sure. And Alex and Brianna, I know, recommend Sun Warrior protein, which also is from my perspective, is also overpriced, similarly to the Garden of Life one, but is also a protein. Do you guys have any other recommendations, or did I cover most of it?
Well, some people have can't tolerate coconut because of nut allergies or intolerances, and there's some coconut in the Sun Warrior, and so our recommendation, other than that, is to use either an alcohol wash soy protein isolate or a pea protein isolate. Nice.
I actually tried to find an organic soy protein isolate recently, and I wasn't able to find one. It seems like all the soy protein isolates are conventional, and soy is just one food that I'm really disinclined to have the conventional non-organic form of.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one.
Yeah. Sheila said, if I'm doing alternate day fasting and want to keep the increase in protein advised by Alex, i.e. 70 to 90 grams a day, how do I do that? All in one meal or spread out multiple meals?
Well, if you're doing the alternate day fasting with that one meal, then you would want to try and do your best to cram it all into one meal. This doesn't mean that you're actually going to do it, but what it means is that really, if you're still hungry at the meal and you haven't hit your protein, then you know what to eat. Like that one meal isn't an excuse to enjoy other goodies. That one meal is very targeted. Eat your protein and your fibrous vegetables. If you don't hit your protein goal because you wanted to have some extra fibrous veggies, that's perfectly fine. But I don't want you to skimp out on the protein because you wanted to have, some carbs or some fats or some other like yummy little thing like that. That meal is designed to satiate you for the rest of the night after you just spent the whole day pretty much fasting. And so that's the goal behind it.
Mm-hmm. Regarding Vital Health Sauna, I was able to check out the website. Unfortunately, they don't provide much in the way of like detailed specs of, for example, measurements of EMFs or ELFs that I could find. So, again, as I said before, it's before you spend several $1,000s to buy an infrared sauna, really worth knowing all the specifications, like knowing how hot the max temperature is, knowing what kind of emitters are in there, the quality of the electrical wiring, the levels of EMFs. I would recommend knowing all of those things, and definitely check out that website that I mentioned, infraredsaunafoundation.org. And also, if you want just my recommendations of like things that I've already vetted and I know are good quality, then just do a Google search for Energy Blueprint saunas, and you'll see my sauna article with my top recommendations. One of the sauna brands that's my top choice right now is Influence saunas. I recommend Influence and Sunlighten if you're going to get an infrared sauna. Influence has been reviewed by that site, by Infrared Sauna Foundation, and it has like about as good of a review as you can possibly get. And compared to most other infrared saunas, also gets up to a max temperature of 170 rather than 150. And I'll keep maybe that seems insignificant to you, but in the case of me, I had a sauna that maxed out at like 140, 150, and I barely sweat in the damn thing. And I felt like I could stay in there all day, and never got to a point where I was actually like uncomfortably hot and felt like I needed to get out. It didn't even really feel like a sauna to me. So I think that matters. And I think having a sauna that gets hot enough to make you uncomfortably hot is really, really important to getting maximal hormetic benefits from using a sauna. Tina, this is a good question. Interesting question. I just finished reading a book on sprouts. According to the book, sprouts have a lot of protein per gram. Could someone replace meat with sprouts to decrease calories and still get enough protein? Unfortunately, eggs and dairy are not my friend, including whey protein. Alex, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so I pulled up a variety of sprouts, and maybe you can clarify like what sprouts are being referred to, but I looked at bean sprouts, alfalfa sprouts, and then just sprouts in general using the USDA food database. Protein content ranges from about 2 to 3.5%, compared to something like legumes being up around 15 to 20%, and animal proteins are 25 to 30%.
So let's just stop right there. I just want to emphasize this. So the start of this question was, according to the book, sprouts have a lot of protein per gram. So based on what Alex just said, that claim is pretty much wrong. They don't have a meaningful amount of protein per gram, and the protein isn't particularly high quality. Keep in mind, I say this as someone who eats a lot of sprouts and loves sprouts.
Sprouts are amazing. They're an amazing.
Yeah, but I don't really consider them like a protein. I consider them greens and veggies.
Yeah, exactly, and that's how we consider them too. They're something to include in your diet because they're awesome, but they are not a source of protein.
Mm-hmm. A significant source of protein.
Yeah.
Lori said, so I've been decreasing my protein every 5 pounds I lose by recalculating. You're saying not to do that, correct? Alex, do you want to answer that first part first?
Yeah, I think that it's because you're working in a range of protein, and we aren't dealing with like extremity ranges where if you go a little over or under, you're going to risk some harmful outcome. I think that it's just too much work. I mean, yeah. Brianna just made a really good point. The goal is to create daily habits, like to create these fat loss habits. The habit is to get into the habit of eating a sufficient amount of protein, not necessarily hitting a very, very specific amount that becomes adjusted every 5 pounds that you lose. So I think it's just easier to set an amount of protein based on that goal range of 1.2 to 1.5 grams per kilo, and then just stick with it until you get to your goal weight. Because if your protein per kilogram of body weight ends up increasing as you lose weight, there's nothing wrong with that. Like it's not going to hurt you.
Yeah. And then did you address the second part of this, Alex? Should I stick to my total protein based on current body weight, then increase to 2 grams per kilogram when I get to goal BMI/fat percentage?
Well, I think that depends a lot on you. For normal weight individuals, people that are at a healthy body composition, the range is 1.6 to 2 grams per kilogram, and you're going to want to be on the higher end the more active that you are. But if you aren't very active, like if you haven't gotten into the habit of regular doing resistance training, then I don't see a need to go beyond the 1.6.
Your appetite will increase too, so you're going to be hungrier, so going up in protein will help fill that a little bit too.
Mm-hmm. Chelsea said, can you go over what gums to avoid and which ones are beneficial? So not a gum per se, but number one thing to, I would say, avoid in these kinds of processed foods is carrageenan. And it's kind of used similarly to gums as a thickener. And then as far as gums, I think the thinking has really changed a lot on this in the last several years, where, a lot of people, including myself, used to think that all the gums were necessarily harmful. And now it's kind of been discovered that, hey, some of these gums actually have benefits to the microbiome and things of that nature. But do you guys know of any gums that are specifically the best, are ones that should be avoided?
No, just the carrageenan, like you had mentioned, is the one to be avoided. But all the others seem to be either relatively benign or actually beneficial.
Mm-hmm. What's the most beneficial gum?
Partially hydrolyzed guar gum. That one's been shown to be a potent prebiotic that I've had this conversation with Analia Camarasa, and that's the one that she recommends for anyone as like a starting point if they're trying to rebuild a good microbiome after having some sort of insult.
Nice. This is interesting. So guar gum used to be something that's like, oh, we look at the ingredient list and it's like, oh, guar gum, we got to avoid that crap. And then now they actually make supplements. You can buy a supplement buying the guar gum by itself because it's so beneficial to your microbiome. So things change, science evolves. It's kind of interesting to watch that happen. Elle said, check out HealthMate. It is infrared. Their office is in Buena Park. So yes, I think HealthMate is very high quality. One thing I will mention, insider look of the sauna industry, is my friend who owns Influence Saunas actually stole the main engineer from HealthMate when she started making her own brand. And so basically she took, I forget the guy's name off the top of my head, but very smart engineer, the guy who designed all the HealthMate saunas. She stole him from their company and said, how can we make a sauna that is even higher quality than HealthMate? What could we improve upon? And that's kind of the starting point for Influence. So Influence and HealthMate make very similar saunas, but Influence is a little bit better. Lori said, plant-based protein powder affects different flour. Susan Pierce Thompson uses it, I've heard, and I've used it for years. I'm actually responsible for getting Susan to start using it, by the way. It took a lot of convincing. This was years ago at that time, and she fought me tooth and nail on it. But I helped her sort of ease back into weight training as part of her routine, and I encouraged her to start supplementing with extra protein as well. I've used it for years before BLA and stopped, but started again this last weekend, and I'm experiencing some good results so far, breaking through a plateau now. Awesome. Glad to hear it, Lori. Angela said, I have a late start to work a couple days a week and would like to put the following things in my morning routine. Morning light with a neighborhood stroll. Nice. Red light therapy. Nice. 30-minute sauna session. Like it. Smoothie and 15 minutes of resistance band. Could you put these in order for me? I'm kind of just doing them willy-nilly. Well, first of all, awesome mix of stuff. That's like a beautiful, perfect morning for weight loss. And first of all, I'd say, like, don't overthink it. Like, if you're doing all of those things, that in itself is a huge win. If I was to try to order them in the way that I would do them, I would say the sauna session after everything else, and then I would have the smoothie to finish off everything. Okay, so after you do the workout, after you do the sauna session, then eat as the very last of those things. The red light therapy you could do before your morning neighborhood stroll. So I would say, like, red light therapy, neighborhood stroll, workout with the resistance band, sauna, then eat food. That would be my way of ordering it. Selena, just following BLE, I believe Susan Pierce Thompson suggests such because the fact of mastication increases neurotransmitters, if I recall correctly. Okay, I think maybe this is referring to the protein powder and the lack of mastication having some potential negative effect. I have heard people make a claim around this, and I think there's probably something to the idea of, like, if you just had a liquid meal by itself with no solid food and no chewing, there might be some negative effects from this. And I haven't really seen solid literature. Maybe you guys have, but arguably there could be some potential negative effect of that habit if done really frequently, let's say as 2 meals of your 3 meals every day. But in the context of, like, let's say you're adding a protein shake in addition to a meal at mealtime, I would have zero concerns with that at all. But do you guys have any thoughts on this? Do you know anything about the mastication issue?
Well, generally when I'm dieting, I do not drink smoothies. But that has changed since I moved to Arizona because it's so hot and I don't have an appetite either. So I think that context needs to be applied here too. If you feel more satiated, then add whole food forms of protein. That's the only other option.
Mm-hmm.
I would add to that. I think you run into a tricky situation where, generally speaking, I recommend people do not drink their calories, but I think that a protein beverage is kind of an exception to the rule, even when it comes to neurotransmitters, because ingesting protein is going to increase protein synthesis throughout the body, and that includes neurotransmitters, which are made from amino acids, which are provided by the dietary protein. And so while I haven't personally seen anything on this, it would not surprise me if consuming protein meals balanced neurotransmitters in your brain, because your brain would suddenly have an influx of supplies and it would say, hey, we're running a little low on serotonin, better make some more. But we're good on dopamine, so we don't need to do anything there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all great comments. There's one other thing I just remembered that I want to mention, because there was at one time several years ago, I really looked into the issue of liquids and satiety, not mastication specifically, but the idea that maybe consuming calories in the form of liquids would lead to less satiety per calorie than the same amount of calories in solid food. And there's some evidence pointing in that direction. But interestingly, I found some research suggesting that certain kinds of liquids, in particular, there was one really interesting study where it was talking about soup, and that soup was actually the most satiating thing. And it likely has to do with how fast it's consumed. So if you're like spooning small bits of it over the course of 15, 20 minutes versus if you just chug it really fast, that likely has some effect on the amount of satiety created. I'll also say through personal experience and experimentation with this, that if you make a really thick smoothie, like really, really thick, so that you can't just drink it, but it's something that like you either have to spoon it or you have to like, it takes some work to sort of sip it or drink it. I find that to almost be the most satiating thing that like I ever consume. It when it's a really super thick thing that takes a long time to, like, it's just unbelievably satiating for me. So
yeah,
it's kind of interesting, the nuances around that.
Yeah, Brianna tried to get me to have smoothies in the morning when we first moved here, and when she would make them, it would fill up 2 big cups. And I would get through one of them, and I'd be like, I'm not having the other one. Like, I'm done. Yeah. Like, I can't even eat anything else from my other.
Like that usually with liquids, like I can just down them and be hungry 10 minutes later.
Oh wow, interesting. So there's probably another nuance here is just individual variation. Yeah, interesting. Okay, Christine said, would eating a handful of nuts with fruit be enough to keep our blood sugar levels spiking up detrimentally versus if we just ate fruit by itself? Alex, do you want to take that?
Possibly. Generally speaking, fruit is except for tropical fruits, many fruits tend to be better on blood glucose because of the fructose content. But yeah, I mean, combining fats with carbohydrates are going to blunt the spike in blood glucose. But it's also going to prolong the amount of time that you're absorbing glucose into your bloodstream, and it's going to prolong the amount of time you spend with a elevated blood glucose level above fasting. And so I think personally that is more detrimental. Do I think fruit and nuts are okay to eat together? Yeah, I do. In fact, my breakfast, I have most of my fats for the day, but I also have 1 or 2 apples because, again, the whole insulin resistance idea of combining carbs and fats is based mostly in theory. And I find that I do better when I have a small amount of carbohydrate from fruit in the morning. My brain functions better. And so I think that that's a superior goal for me than the theoretical concern of insulin resistance.
Mm-hmm. Lori is just commenting on Bright Line Eating, their stance on pea protein. Basically, they say that it is an acceptable Bright Line Eating ingredient. So if the product contains no other BLE non-BLE friendly foods in the first 3 ingredients, it's an acceptable product. So they looks like they are okay with pea protein powder. I don't know about all protein powders, but at the very least, pea protein powder is acceptable for people in BLE. Thalia said, Brianna, do you have any suggestions for getting a jump start on weight loss when you have insulin resistance? The doctor wants to put me on meds. I'm exhausted and get despondent as the weight isn't shifting.
Really, it's just about calorie restriction. I know that's really a simple answer that you don't want to hear, but what are you having trouble with? That's what I would like to know, because I could make a million suggestions and they could be applicable to you or not. As far as putting you on meds, I'm guessing he wants to put you on metformin. If you lose the fat, you likely won't have to be put on that. So that's a choice. If you have no energy, then I would just control calories right now until you lose some of that, and then you'll have more energy to work out and move and walk.
I want to comment on this. This is kind of one of the catch-22s here, which is that in your situation, it sounds like you have insulin resistance, so you're also possibly pre-diabetic if your doctor wants to put you on meds, or maybe you do have actual type 2 diabetes. You're also fatigued and exhausted. And the common theme around here, around the insulin resistance and the fatigue, is that these can be caused by carrying around too much fat mass. You're also in this program, which leads me to assume that you recognize that you have weight to lose and you want to lose it. And so you're in a catch-22 because you kind of don't want to implement any of these things because you're all fatigued and you're tired and you're exhausted. But at the same time, if you put the effort towards dieting and losing that fat mass, it could very well be the thing that gets you off the meds, gets you insulin sensitive, and gives you energy back. And so this also gets back to another answer I gave earlier about when you're in that type of situation where maybe you can't move around a lot and you're maintaining your weight on a low amount of calories, then the ideal scenario, at least in the beginning, might be to pick like 2 or 3 days out of the week where you really heavily restrict your calorie intake and then eat normally on the other days. So that way you can start facilitating some fat loss and getting your energy back. Without feeling like you are restricting yourself to unsustainable heights on a chronic basis.
And it sounds like you have a little bit of like diet depression going on too, where you feel discouraged about it. Those voices sabotage us more times than not when we tell ourselves that we're not going to achieve our goal. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you need to talk to yourself like you would talk to a child, right? Say, yes, I'm going to achieve this. You just have to reframe it a little too.
Nice. T, any time frame on Ultra Brain, when it will be available or when we can get more information on that? So actually, the shipment arrived at the shipping and fulfillment house yesterday. So it is technically ready. I just have to finish getting up the sales page and order page for it, and then it's ready to go. So next few days should be ready to purchase. And let's see. Tina, is Schizandra powder healthy to use in protein shakes? I would say yes. I've experimented heavily with Schizandra and I like it, and I'm impressed with the research on it. So definitely ingredient I like a lot. Christine, why is it more ideal to take fat-soluble vitamins like A, K, E, etc. with fats? Doesn't it already have the fat in it itself? No, it does not have the fat in it itself, and it absorbs into your body much better when it's consumed with dietary fats. Selena, Lori saying to Selena, Susan Pierce Thompson talks about no smoothies, but that is more for breaking down fiber matrix, and for those exercising, I've heard her and her coaches say that protein powder is compliant. Oh, great. Happy to hear that. I never liked fighting with Susan much. We started our relationship off fighting, actually. You guys might have heard the story, but when we first met, we had some differences in our views. Like she's, hardcore abstainer focused, and I was very much like, your approach is too extreme and it's unsustainable because nobody can commit to these sorts of, never eating sugar, never eating flour ever again. And, we ended up having a 4-hour argument in our first conversation. And then we had subsequent to that many arguments over the next several days. But we eventually arrived at a lot of agreement, and she learned some stuff from me. I learned some stuff from her, and I also softened my position and realized the importance of that approach, and that there's a subset of the population that really is served really well by that kind of approach. And not only is it not unsustainable as I thought, but there are some people for whom that is by far the most sustainable, or the only sustainable approach, is to have very clear rules and boundaries like that. So we had a tumultuous, rocky relationship at the start of our friendship, but since gotten very good since then. Karen, could you please clarify the meal combinations, fats without starches or sugars, etc.? In your course, you gave 3 suggestions for meals. Does that mean all 3 meals on a given day should be fatty foods, or is it okay to have a fatty meal, then a starchy meal, etc. on the same day? I don't know if these meal suggestions are the levels of fat loss that you spoke about in your webinar. I'm only on level 5. So I'll answer just the last part. This is just one layer of the levels that you're talking about. This is just one specific of habits as it relates to the nutrition habits specifically. But Alex, do you want to clarify the meal combos?
Yeah, super simple clarification. It's just at meals. So like if you're looking at breakfast and you're trying to figure out what to eat, if you have a bunch of fat that you want to eat, then just try to have that with protein and fibrous vegetables or a little fruit. If you're looking at you're going to go eat out at a Mexican restaurant and you're just going to love the beans and rice, then try to keep the fat content of that meal on the lower end. That's just the general framework. And it's just at individual meals. So if you eat a fatty meal at breakfast, you can certainly have a carby meal at lunch. It doesn't matter.
Nice. Great comment here. I just took a screenshot of it because I always take screenshots of testimonials. Christy said, I have to say that the weight is falling off effortlessly, even though the protein is not quite as high as I'm supposed to be. Falling off effortlessly is pretty much as good as a testimonial gets when it comes to weight loss. Especially when, we have a program that isn't some, extreme gimmicky diet that's even intended to create some massive extreme amount of fat loss in just days after starting. So that's awesome, Christy, and keep up the good work. Michael, is there any sane way to include pastries in the diet? This kind of gets at what I was alluding to a minute ago with abstainers and moderators. For some people, there might be. I'll give you an example of me, and probably Alex and Brianna are very similar. Actually, maybe Brianna is not. I'm remembering some bits of details there, but for me, I am just not tempted by junk food. Like if something is unhealthy, junk food, and just garbage, not nourishing my body, it's not usually a temptation for me. I'll tell you, sometimes maybe if I'm on vacation, sometimes my temptation barrier, I think, is lowered to some degree. But in general, I'm not tempted. But if there's some opportunity, to have homemade pastries or something that are relatively good quality, I might indulge once a week, and in that, and then it's really not a big deal if I have it, that infrequently, and it doesn't derail me, and it doesn't cause me to crave processed foods the next day and binge eat or anything like that. It's just I indulged a little bit and then went back to good habits. So yes, for some people they can do that. And for other people, and this gets at the moderator abstainer thing, other people can't do that very well and need to, have very clear boundaries around that. Do you guys want to add? And Brianna, maybe you want to add some thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I do the same thing. I have a little bit of an issue though if it's high quality, kind of like junky food, and then I'll like it's the health halo, and so I think I could have more. But junky food, like I don't have any inkling to go eat any of it ever, and that was like trained over years and years of just not noticing it, not paying attention, like having a plan in place. We do eat out like once a week is our thing. But otherwise we don't.
Yeah, and when we eat out, it's not like we go eat out for the purpose of eating junk food. It's just that some of our barriers might lower. Like I'll have English muffins with butter on them, for example, and I love it. But Brianna won't. You know, she'll have an omelet. So yeah, it's just, you know, figure out how does it affect you. And again, the goal is developing habits, because if you're someone, for example, all of us have now mentioned that we're not even tempted by junky food. I make the really kind of gross analogy of if you're walking on the sidewalk and you see some dog poop, does it ever go through your head, oh, I want to eat that or play with it or whatever? No. It's not even like an option on the table. If someone came up to you and said, "Hey, do you want to do that?" You'd look at them like they were crazy. And that's the type of mindset that you want to have with foods that are detrimental to obtaining the lean physique that you want.
I'll mention a funny conversation I had with my family 2 days ago. A number of us were talking about, you know, my brother, my sister, my wife and I were talking about like chemical detergents and perfumes, and how, you know, you can like walk by people in public or at the park or at the beach or something, and you can smell people's perfumes and chemical detergents and stuff sometimes from like 20, 30 feet away. And how it's just annoying to smell these really nasty synthetic detergents and perfumes. And my niece, who's like 16 years old, who thinks all the healthy stuff is all a bunch of nonsense and thinks that like I'm crazy and ridiculous, and you know, who eats a diet of nothing but like meat and bread. She's like, oh, I love it. You know, I love the smell of like, you know, detergents on clothes and stuff like that. So and you know, all the synthetic perfumes, that sort of thing. So it's really interesting how education influences your perception of something. So somebody who just has no idea about the health consequences of something smells it and it's like, oh, this smells really nice. But then you learn, oh, you know, those smells are phthalates, which are hormone disrupting chemicals and are toxic to your body. Like, do you still find it a nice smell now, knowing that you're inhaling particles of a toxic hormone disrupting substance? And then, so once you learn that layer, then it's like, oh, the smell becomes something unpleasant at that point because of your knowledge, your association to it. And the same is really true with unhealthy food. Like we all grow up loving cookies and cake and ice cream.
We're designed to by evolution.
Yeah. And then some of us learn at some point that those things are harming our body. So like the aversion to them becomes stronger than the desire to get that pleasure. Do I still find donuts and cake a pleasurable taste? Yeah, I do. But I have enough of an aversion to it that it actually is an easy decision. It's not even tempting for me to indulge in those things.
Yeah, and even if you did indulge, it's like every bite is a bite of regret.
Yeah, exactly. And certainly after the meal, you're like, why did I do that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Christine's asking, should nuts be considered protein or fat? Alex, do you want to classify that?
Fat, definitely.
Okay.
And you said in here, sorry if this sounds ignorant. It's not ignorant at all. There's no such thing as a stupid question, and that's the entire point we do these Q&As.
Especially because nuts do have some protein in them.
Yeah, and they're often promoted by many authoritative bodies as like peanuts as a source of protein. And they do have protein in them, no doubt. It's the issue is just that protein comes with so many calories. I mean, you're getting anywhere from 6 to 9 grams of protein for 200 calories. Whereas even if you were to eat legumes, you would be getting like 20 grams of protein for that same amount of calories or more. So it's just not an ideal source.
Mickey saying, I'm confused about the recommendation not to eat fat with carbs. My previous understanding was that doing so decreases the rate which they enter the bloodstream and thus prevent blood sugar spikes. Is this not true? So Alex already addressed this. Alex, do you want to do a super quick recap of that answer?
The quickie is that yes, the spike is reduced, but your blood sugar and your blood insulin stay elevated for a longer period of time, like threefold longer. So
what's the downside of that?
Well, the downside is that all of the harmful effects of type 2 diabetes come from having chronically elevated blood sugar and blood fat levels. And so, sure, you're not spiking up to 160, but you're also not returning back to normal within an hour. You're now spending 3 hours staying at 120.
Lori's curious about glyphosate being a contributor to thyroid issues. There's a number of lines of research around glyphosate being a contributor to all kinds of health problems, being pro-cancer, being disruptive to the microbiome. If it, for example, is disruptive to the gut microbiome, like disrupts the microbiome or causes leaky gut, for example, just through that mechanism alone, it could disrupt thyroid function, irrespective of whether it has any direct action on the thyroid at all. So yeah, and then it's also, glyphosate is also this really controversial territory that has become sort of an area where skeptics, evidence-based skeptics, quote unquote, have sort of planted their flag and said, no, glyphosate and Roundup are not a, don't cause cancer. And anybody who thinks they cause cancer and cause health problems just is a quack and doesn't understand science. And so there's like, and for good reason, there's like glyphosate and Roundup is I assume, multi-billion-dollar a year business, maybe tens of billions of dollars a year. So there's, I'm sure, lots of paying of people to defend it going on, and paying of scientists to conduct quote unquote science that shows that it's safe. And so it's tricky territory. But do you guys have any thoughts on the glyphosate issue?
Yeah, I think that glyphosate should be banned. The U.S. is like the only remaining country that allows its use. And while many in the quote-unquote evidence-based crowd would crucify me for saying this, I think that it's pretty obvious that the FDA and individuals from Monsanto have been going back and forth between their authoritative positions. And I think that there really is uncontroversial evidence that the government bodies that should be regulating substances like this are impacted by industry. And I mean, as one example, the Stockholm Convention was started in 2001. Its goal was to completely eliminate the use of persistent organic pollutants. As of today, there's like 29 chemicals in there that most of the world has either greatly reduced usage or completely eliminated. And there's only 6 countries that have not signed on to the Stockholm Convention in the entire world, and one of them is the U.S. And you just have to ask why.
Yeah, I don't want to digress too much, but there's an interesting term that I came across recently called trustanoia, and it is the opposite of paranoia. And so, like, someone who is paranoid, who's like a paranoid conspiracy theorist, could be someone who views the world through, like, nothing is as what it seems. There's always sort of secret things going on behind the curtain and ulterior motives and, devious people sort of manipulating things with an agenda, right? In every circumstance, like to the extreme of, like, the earth isn't really round, it's flat. And it's all a lie. And, they've been lying to us since we were kids for decades that the earth is this ball floating in the sky. Really, it's this flat disk. That's the extreme of paranoid conspiracy thinking. But and we all sort of pathologize that. But on the other end of the spectrum is trustanoia, is someone who has totally irrational trust in the authorities and is unwilling to see and acknowledge, like, for example, industry influence on science and how that leads to bad science. That, like, for example, science that claims that something that causes cancer is perfectly safe is one example of that. And there are certain people who have a cognitive bias, just as there are people with cognitive bias toward paranoid conspiracy thinking. There's people who have the opposite bias towards, I trust any sort of authoritative body, no matter what they say, and no matter how sort of obvious it might be that there might be some shady things going on here, I still choose to trust whatever the authorities are telling me, right? And so, keep in mind, there was a time when Black people weren't allowed to vote, and women weren't allowed to vote, and the authorities came up with some sort of justification for why those things should be. And certain people were like, yeah, that makes sense. That seems like a good idea. I don't think Black people or women should vote at all. That would be terrible, because what would happen if we allowed women to vote, And there were people who, there was a time in the early 1900s, 1940s, 1950s, somewhere around there, where there were ads in newspapers and magazines of doctors smoking cigarettes and saying, cigarettes are healthy for you and you should smoke cigarettes because they're so wonderful for your health, right? And somebody who would have said, like, hey, I think cigarettes are maybe bad for you. I think maybe that's not such a good idea. The people who have trustanoia would have been like, well, you're just a crazy conspiracy theorist for thinking that cigarettes could be bad for you. Look, the good doctors are telling us cigarettes are good for you. Who are you to not trust them, right? So my point is, and this is really tricky territory because everything's a unique circumstance, but we need to be aware of our cognitive biases and always try to land on, an accurate interpretation of reality. And sometimes that means distrusting some forms of evidence, and sometimes it means distrusting your, paranoid tendencies and so on. But anyway, hopefully you get the gist of what I'm getting at there. But glyphosate is maybe a good example of where we need to maybe be distrusting of some evidence and to examine things with an eye towards skepticism, given very, very massive business interests. Selena said, how do you determine what an individual's weight is? Susan Pierce Thompson follows 100 pounds for 5 feet and add 5 pounds per every inch. I'm 5'2", so it would be absolutely unhealthy to be 110 pounds. Yeah, you guys probably would be able to comment on that better than I could.
Well, I did some little calculations, and at 110 pounds at your height, your BMI would be about 20. So it wouldn't technically be unhealthy, but it would definitely be pushing down there. In theory, a healthy BMI for you would be between 110 pounds and 135 pounds. Frankly, I think that the idea of an ideal body weight is just something to give you a starting point for a goal. And it's going to change based on how you want your body to look, how much muscle mass you have. Like for me, I would consider myself at an ideal body weight right now, but I'm technically overweight. I think my BMI is like 28 or 29. But I'm
Same for me, by the way.
I'm certainly not overweight. Like I'm at a healthy weight right now because I have a lot of muscle mass. So the ideal weight and the BMI are just sort of to give you like an idea that you then have to mold to your personal circumstances.
Mm-hmm. I'll also just add one more point, like individual variation of like skeletal structure and like body density. Like I've met guys, especially for example, Black guys who are like built, who look like similar in size to me, when it like physically the same height, like similar amounts of muscle mass from the looks of it, who are like 30 pounds lighter than me. And so sometimes there's individual variation and like bone density and skeletal structure and just sort of density of tissues that make these kinds of rules a little bit difficult. If you're a thicker, denser person, maybe for some people at your height, the ideal weight is 110 pounds. Maybe for you, it's more like 125, so, or 120 or whatever it is, there's definitely some individual variation there. Bobby, I've been trying to add more raw foods, including raw meats. I've not had dairy in many years, but added raw milk. What's your opinion on raw milk? When I was consuming dairy, I consumed almost all raw dairy. As far as raw meat, I've always considered the potential harms to outweigh the potential benefits. So outside of sushi and maybe the occasional beef tartare, like not a big advocate of raw meat. Do you guys have any thoughts on this?
With raw dairy, I did that for years, and for my kids, that's all they drank when they were growing up. I still don't do well with dairy fat, though, even goat dairy. Like I break out and I just don't feel well on it. So it depends on how you react to it, really. If you're dieting, though, you cannot control the fat in full fat raw dairy. So that's something to keep in mind and use it sparingly. I would prefer to see you probably use it as like a cheese, make a cheese. I used to make cheese out of my raw milk. So you can add just a little to your salad or something instead of drinking like a whole glass where you don't know how much fat you're getting. It depends on if it's like full fat, like if you stir the fat in or.
Yeah. Alex, do you want to comment on raw meat?
I'll just say that cooking made us human, and we have studies using both raw meats as well as raw plant foods showing that the processes of both cooking and pulverizing those foods increases the digestibility and our ability to extract nutrition from it. So even if we are to ignore any risk of foodborne illnesses, which will be higher in raw meat products, especially like poultry, for example, you also have to consider the fact that raw foods are just not going to be as nutritious to the body.
What about, I remember I was into to raw food for a period of time many years ago, and one of the ideas was like, cooking denatures proteins. So like you cook eggs and you're denaturing it, you cook meat, you're denaturing it. Alex, what are your thoughts on that idea, and the idea that cooking denatures and denatured protein is harmful or bad for you or not as healthy as raw?
I believe that denaturing happens as part of the normal digestive process. And it's not harmful, and it's one of the reasons why nutrients become more bioavailable, because the denaturing process makes the protein strands in the food more accessible to your digestive enzymes. And to give you an example of this, eggs, a raw egg, the digestibility of the protein content is only 50%. When you cook that egg, it increases to 94%. As an example of you're literally, if you consume a raw egg, you're losing half of the protein it gives you, simply because your body cannot access that protein due to it being raw. So denature is a scary sounding word, but it's just like Ari was mentioning with the word processing. Not everything that's processed is bad. Not everything that's denatured is bad. There are exceptions. Whey protein has bioactive peptides in it that are incredibly beneficial for health, but they can be denatured with certain processing methods used in the creation of whey protein. And therefore you're losing out on benefits. And there have been companies that have patented non-denatured whey protein manufacturing processes to use these non-denatured whey proteins in HIV patients, for example, to boost their immune function. So denaturing can be detrimental if you're looking for like medical grade food supplements in that regard. But when you're talking about eating meat and your diet in general, it's more likely than not beneficial.
Mm-hmm. Excellent answer. Miriam, I just joined. Sorry if I missed something. And then she's saying she would do well with if there were simple, easy meal plans for different weights and ages and genders. And she's asking if that's something we would consider. What do you guys think?
There's too many variations
So with something like that, there is just too many variables involved. It would take a significant amount of time. And that's not necessarily something that we're trying to avoid. It's just that there's a lot that goes into it. So it has to be customized to you specifically. And it's something we could definitely help you with more one-on-one, but it's not something that we're ever going to be able to make as part of the program itself because it is so highly individualized that it would just be.
And we're also one important point I want to make here is like, this isn't a specific diet program where we're saying like, here's the optimal diet, as many, even I would say almost most programs out there do, where they're like, okay, this is the Atkins diet, or this is the keto diet, or this is the, low fat vegan diet, or this is the bright line eating diet. And here's the way to do bright line eating. Here's the way to do low fat, vegan, whole foods, plant-based, according to, our approach. Here's the way to do a Mediterranean diet. Here's the way to do a paleo diet. Here's the way to do a keto diet or a carnivore diet, whatever it is, right? If you're signing up for a specific kind of diet, then it's really simple and easy to give meal plans. It's like, okay, here's the template for how to do our keto diet that we're recommending. Okay. But in this program, we're taking in people who are everything from keto dieters to vegan dieters to bright line eaters to the whole spectrum of everybody. And we're trying to show you, here's the principles and strategies that you can layer into your system, your template of what you're already doing, and your preferred dietary template to take it to the next level. Okay. And we're not saying, hey, you need to get off your paleo diet and do a vegan low fat diet, or you need to get off your keto diet and do bright line eating, right? We're tailoring to a wide range of things. And the only way to do that while offering specific meal plans would be to offer like 50 different versions of meal plans, depending on those templates. And at that point, then it still causes confusion because people are going to be like, well, which one of these options should I choose? You know what I mean? So anyway, hopefully that makes it clearer. Alex and Brianna, if somebody is coming into this program without a clear template of what they're already doing, so like, let's say bright line eaters already have a great system that they have as their foundational dietary template, and then they're layering in all these more advanced strategies on top of it. Let's say somebody's coming into this program eating, a typical sort of standard American diet, maybe not the worst variation of standard American diet, but like a typical diet. They don't know what a healthy diet template looks like or a healthy fat loss template looks like. What should they do?
Well, this is great timing because I'm going through we've gotten a lot of feedback from people that have purchased this program, and we have taken that feedback to heart, and we're starting to implement it into updates to the lesson plans. And so this question that you're asking, Ari, actually fits in perfectly with similar questions that others have had with difficulty of where to start. Because frankly, when Ari and myself and Brianna first developed this program, we came at it with the mindset of this is for people that already have all the basics down. But what we're realizing with more and more people joining is that even the basics can be a struggle for a lot of people. Like maybe they have a lot of the lifestyle habits down, in fact, that we recommend, but it's the basics that are tripping them up. Like they need to go back to fundamentals in order to make progress. And so what I'm doing right now, the update I'm working on currently is for the lesson number 2, fat loss fundamentals. And part of that is laying out like these are the fundamental tenets of your diet that need to be in place to make progress. And so whether you're coming from bright line eating or whether you're coming from the standard American diet, it's going to be the same. First, where's your protein at? This is the most important nutrient when you're dieting. It's one of the most satiating. It's the only nutrient that can preserve your muscle mass. So where is it? Are you getting an adequate amount? And if not, let's focus on getting that to where it should be, because as you increase your protein, you're going to drown out other foods because of the enhanced satiety.
Same with vegetables. And I like to have people add things instead of like taking them out. So their focus goes on adding.
Yeah. So how can we add the protein? And then after that, now let's add fibrous vegetables. How many servings are you eating? Are you eating them at every meal? These are simple steps to work on, and we want to add them in, because as we add more of these very important foods to your diet, it's going to push other things out that might be denser in calories and less nutritious. And so that's kind of my head game right now as I'm updating this lesson, is getting you to understand that, first of all, there is no best diet for everyone. You're all going to have your own best diet. Second of all, you do need to have a calorie deficit. Like, I'm sorry, that's just the laws of physics. But how we achieve that can be done in many ways. And so third, you need to have an adequate protein intake to maximize fat loss and muscle retention. Fourth, you need to eat a ton of fibrous vegetables, because that's what's going to set you up for long-term success, both in the body composition and in the health realm. And we can't overlook the importance of health, because who cares if you have six-pack abs if you're going to end up in the hospital, with colon cancer. So it's setting up that. And then at the end of all of it, I plan on giving people some very straightforward recommendations about how they can do all this. I want to be better about giving practical advice. And that's something I want to do with each of the lessons.
Nice. Rebecca is asking recommendations for protein bars that have good fiber. I will say relatively recently, I've done some scouring of Amazon for different protein bars that have good ingredients, that have, little or no added sugar, that have high protein, that have fiber and so on. And I found a few that are okay. However, and I've tried several. They're almost all very high palatability. They're almost all not high enough in protein. Almost all have some added sugar or very high levels of carbs and sugar content. And yeah, they're really easy to overeat and start craving them. Myself and my wife are not inclined to get addicted to stuff. And we both found ourselves getting addicted to these bars. And I was like, okay, we need to do an intervention here, so we're not binging on these bars every day. Yeah, tough to find a good one, but maybe Alex and Brianna have done better than I have in finding one that is really healthy.
Well, here's the issue, is that the bars we use that are high in protein and very beneficial prebiotic fiber are the Quest bars, but we find them hyper palatable. Like, we can't keep them stocked in the house. When we have them, we go out and we get a single bar to enjoy. But yeah, we can't keep them in the house because
They're glorified candy bars.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And that's a benefit for the company, in the sense that they were able to actually make a healthy candy bar, so to speak. Like, they taste really good. But for our purposes, they aren't great. If you wanted a treat, if you are someone who is able to have treats without it undoing a lot of things, getting back to that conversation of moderator versus abstainer, a Quest bar is probably one of the healthier options that you could pick, because it literally is just protein and fiber. But
I like the taste of meat. Epic bars, I like those when I'm traveling.
And then there's the one that I have that I do eat occasionally. I have kind of a specific context in which I eat it, which is before workouts. When I'm on the go. So for example, if I'm taking my dog to the beach for a walk and then I know I'm going to come home and immediately work out and I haven't eaten a meal yet, I'll have the bar in the car on the way home, before, to get some protein and some calories in me before my workout. But that's the rule in my head. That's the only time it's okay to have them. And so that's how I can avoid overdoing the bar.
We'll use it as a dessert after dinner, for example, or if we're traveling, we'll usually take them if we're on a plane, where there's we know we're not going to be eating any of the little snacks they give out on a plane, and airport food is usually low quality and overpriced, so we'll bring some Quest bars to get the protein and fiber. And once we run out, then we're out. So there's no risk of us overeating or anything.
Yeah, totally. Christine, is it normal for B vitamins to turn urine bright yellow? And if so, why? Yes, it is. And I believe, is it the riboflavin? Okay. Riboflavin, I couldn't tell you like specifically why it does that, what the reaction is. Maybe
It's just the color of the compound. When it meets with oxygen, it just turns yellow, and so that's what happens in your urine.
And would that affect Dutch test results? I do not believe it would. No. And similarly, can cytodetox binder affect urine as well, and as such as make it more acidic / cloudy because of the toxins being pulled out? That's a good question. I do not know if zeolites could do that. It's, I guess, theoretically possible that they might, but I haven't heard that.
Cloudy urine is usually overly alkaline urine, like seen in bladder infections. So I would, if there's any burning, I'd get it checked out. It's usually not acidic urine. That's pretty clear.
It's not normal for it to burn when I urinate.
Right?
It's been going on for years for me. I just thought that happens to everybody. Miriam said, I get very dizzy in hot weather and need electrolytes or watermelon to make me feel better. Is there anything I can do to avoid being so weak in hot weather? Ultimately, food or cool, sweet drinks make me feel better. Otherwise, I just feel weak, dizzy, tired, and grumpy. Yeah, I mean, I would just say stay hydrated, but also, I mean, I think the way I would interpret this, maybe Alex and Brianna have a different answer, but the way I would interpret this as like someone who is working out for the first time. Like if I've as a trainer many years ago, I had the experience of like taking people through their first workout or their first handful of workouts that they've really ever done in their life. And almost universally, people find it horrible. It's like just an awful experience. Like it's painful. They feel awful afterward. They feel awful during. The whole thing is just painful. And yet it's also possible that with time and continuing to do it regularly, it's not so horribly unpleasant and painful and actually becomes a source of pleasure that you seek out and you enjoy. So I think this might just be physical and psychological adaptation and being normalized to being in hot weather by doing it frequently and building up your tolerance to it, both physically and mentally. But do you guys have any different thoughts on that?
If you are dieting on like 1,200 calories, I would suggest to drink electrolytes if you're experiencing that. But otherwise, yeah, I agree 100%.
Catherine said about the nutrition myths, does sucralose have adverse effects on the microbiome? I know Alex said they're not much of a problem.
Well, I didn't say that technically. This is an area of emerging research, and I base this whole program on being as honest as possible. And there are people out there that say sucralose is perfectly fine to consume, no issue. And there's people that say it's the devil and needs to be avoided at all costs. And I don't think either position is correct. I think that we don't know. We don't have a lot of answers to this. I think that there is preliminary evidence, especially in mice, that shows that sucralose does cause dysbiosis of the microbiome. But those results haven't necessarily been confirmed in humans yet. And at the same time, you have individuals or studies claiming that these changes in the microbiome are tied to insulin resistance that presents in the rodents. So then when you look at studies in humans, you see that in particular, there have been 3 studies done. 2 of those studies used really low doses of sucralose and found that it does cause modest insulin resistance. The dose is the equivalent of about 15 packets of Splenda per day, if we want to call that low. On the other hand, you have a 3rd study that used the exact same population of overweight and obese adults that actually gave them the equivalent of like 50 packets of Splenda. So the dose was 3 times as high, and they found that there was no effect on insulin resistance using the gold standard measurement techniques of a euglycemic hyperinsulinemic clamp. And so my position is that I mentioned all 3 studies in the lesson because it's unknown. You have 2 studies that show an effect at low doses, but 1 study that shows an effect at high doses, or no effect at high doses. And it could very well be that just like with many toxicants, there tends to be a kind of hormetic zone where if you have too low of an exposure, you see detrimental effects because your body's adaptive processes can't kick in because the exposure dose is too low. But once you exceed a certain threshold, then your body is able to adapt and to fight back where you might actually offset the detrimental effects. But then if you continue to increase, then you enter into the toxicity realm where your body's adaptive mechanisms cannot keep up with the harm caused by the compound. I think that that's a possible scenario with sucralose, but again, a lot of it's unknown. And so the precautionary principle would just suggest to minimize your consumption of it.
And don't cook with it.
And don't cook with it.
When it's heated, it forms a different chemical. I'm drawing a blank on the name, but you don't want to heat it because it's...
Yeah, it becomes carcinogenic when it's heated, so don't bake with it.
Or, I mean, would that also be the case if you're dumping it into hot coffee?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Usually heat treatments are a function of both time and temperature. And so how hot does the coffee get and how long does it stay at that temperature? When you bake something, you're at like 350 for 45 minutes? And then there's the whole issue of it being in a solid in the cooked substance versus it being dissolved in a liquid. How's that impact it? Again, a lot of unknowns. I think the one thing that we can say about all artificial sweeteners is that, they haven't been shown to be toxic in animal models at the super high doses under the tested conditions, but they haven't been tested for every possible impact they could have on your health. And we don't know what the low dose effects are because they've never been tested at low doses. And that's the exact issue with a lot of pesticides too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just to emphasize again, precautionary principle warrants like erring on the side of caution and thinking maybe these things will turn out to have some harm. And so if you can use something like monk fruit or stevia, or even I would say like my actual favorite sweetener is allulose, which is a really interesting sweetener that not many people have heard of, that looks just like sugar and has quite a bit of sweetness, but actually has health benefits. Yep. And there's a number of studies showing very clear health benefits, including improvements in insulin resistance, improvements in fat loss, and even some anti-aging longevity effects as well. So the only downside is it's quite a lot more expensive than sugar, but the difference between paying for something that's harmful versus helpful. So,
what I would conclude this one on is if we're looking at all the sweeteners that you could buy on the common market right now, like if you walked into a Whole Foods, I would say your three best bets for a sweetener would be some combination of stevia, monk fruit, or erythritol. Those are the ones that have been shown to be either relatively benign or actually beneficial to health. And they're easy to find, and they're all basically 0 calories too.
Nice. Michael, do you have a positive spin on oxalates too? I think maybe this is in reference to our positive spin on phytic acid earlier. So
you have kidney issues, I don't think it.
Yeah, I'm that's my thinking as well, is like I haven't seen any compelling evidence that they're harmful unless somebody has oxalate sensitivity.
Yeah, and I think the stress of avoiding them and having a bunch of food restrictions causes more harm to the body than actually eating that stuff.
Yeah.
Wait, but I watched a YouTube video.
I once had someone come up to me at a health event, and I was introduced to this person, and the person who introduced us was like, "Oh, Ari's really into like energy and mitochondria," and so this woman was like, "Oh, you're into mitochondria? Well, oxalates cause an increase in this chemical, which poisons mitochondria, and so oxalates are bad." And I was like, "Yeah, I don't think physiology is quite that simplistic, where we can just say, if any food that contains oxalates is harming our mitochondria. I think we might have some mechanisms in place to mitigate those sorts of consequences, and the big picture might be a bit more complex than your view on things.
Well,
And eating foods like kale, for example, or spinach, overwhelmingly are associated with health benefits, net health benefits. So clearly, whatever the beneficial compounds in them are outweighing any potential negative effects of oxalates for, I would imagine, almost everybody except those sensitive to oxalates.
I agree.
Thalia, I was diagnosed with insulin resistance after doing the Tim Ferriss diet. Could there be a correlation? Yeah, absolutely. There could be a correlation. It's possible. I don't know what specific diet. Maybe you're talking about I think he calls it the slow carb diet. I think he's put a number of different ideas out there in the 4-Hour Body. But yeah, Alex, do you want to maybe comment?
I don't know what that diet is, so I'll give it to Brianna.
Well, it could. I don't think the diet per se, because it's a pretty healthy diet in my opinion. I think that you could become insulin resistant if you're losing a lot of fat, but that will eventually go away. Like fat loss diets.
Yeah, you could. It's not uncommon for people that lose fat to be temporarily insulin resistant, because the fat, when it leaves your fat cell, it's circulating around in your blood, and it interferes. Fat in the blood interferes with insulin's ability to bind to its receptors. So it's possible that you just kind of tested at a bad time. But it could also be that, yeah, it did cause insulin resistance because maybe it caused weight gain or something. I don't know.
Yeah. And it's worth mentioning that the primary cause of insulin resistance is excess body fat itself.
Exactly.
And so the key factor here, why I said that it's possible, is, hey, if you did a particular diet, regardless of whatever the diet was, the specifics of the foods eaten, if you did any diet and gained weight over the course of several weeks or several months of doing it, that absolutely can contribute to insulin resistance. Lori has a question for Alex. Your comment on protein powders last week and how it reduces potential anti-nutrients. Do you want to? And so now she's commenting how we were talking about phytic acid specifically is beneficial. Can you clarify the distinctions here?
Yeah. So you have to look at your goal. If your goal is to just get some anti-nutrients into your gut, which are going to benefit your gut health, then eat your plants. I think that's great. But if your goal is to absorb bioavailable amounts of protein, then you don't want those anti-nutrients, because some of those anti-nutrients, not necessarily phytic acid, but other ones like trypsin inhibitors, interfere with the protein digesting enzymes of your digestive tract. So that is a benefit for a plant protein powder, because the goal is to get protein. And so you don't want any of those things interfering with your body's ability to break down and absorb the protein.
Yeah, it's worth you kind of alluded to this, but I just want to state it directly that we did not say earlier that everything that's in the category of an anti-nutrient that binds nutrients and prevents absorption has health benefits. We're talking about specifically phytic acid and the health benefits associated with that. There are other kinds of anti-nutrients in foods that may have net harm and may have none of the same benefits as phytic acid does.
Exactly. So yeah, plant protein powder, huge benefit. In your diet, you say you eat nuts and seeds every day and beans and legumes. Keep at it. Those are very, very beneficial.
Nice. Christine said, I thought vitamin A was sourced from things like cod liver oil and vitamin K from things like natto and ghee, etc. But as a vitamin, are these essentially isolates without the fat, is what you're saying? And that is why it's better to take with fats for better absorption, since originally from a fat. Would taking astaxanthin and omega-3s, etc., be better ingested with fats as well? Yeah, probably. Astaxanthin will absorb better with fats. As far as the first part of what you're saying, the logic of these foods coming from foods rich in fat, Yes, I think that's largely true. And in the context of where these nutrients exist, generally fat-soluble vitamins do exist in foods that contain some fat. And so that takes care of the issue. The way we answered the question before was more as in the form of like, if you are supplementing with vitamin A or D or E or K, is it good to take them with dietary fats? And the answer to that is yes. Lori, thanks for this. I can up my activity level, but not high while I'm building muscle strength, stamina, and muscle from atrophy from an auto wreck. I feel this might be good twice a week, but not more. Would there be any benefit to doing it once a week?
Yeah, I think that there definitely would. Even though fat loss would be slower or possibly non-existent if you compensated for it on other days, I think that having just that one day to really kind of ram into the repair and regenerate mode would be beneficial to help build back up your metabolic flexibility and help get more of those damaged proteins out of your body. I know that you're in a fat loss program and you probably want to lose fat. That's why you're here. But I think that you're going to need to spend a little time kind of staying on the fence as you build up your strength, stamina, and muscle, because it's a lot more difficult to build up muscle when you're dieting. And I think that, frankly, getting a nice, healthy foundation of muscle tissue and properly functioning muscle tissue and, mitochondrial rich muscle tissue is going to do much more for your health and for your long-term body composition than just trying to diet at the moment, at least diet intensely. And so a lot of these habits, again, this program is not just focused on fat loss, it's also focused on building muscle or minimizing muscle loss. So like eating sufficient protein is an easy example of what can you do to help with that goal of building strength, stamina, and muscle tissue. Even if you eat enough to prevent fat loss, eating sufficient protein is still going to help with that lean mass regain.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have just a few more minutes. You guys might hear a crying 3-year-old in the background, so I'm going to run to help my wife now that the nanny took off for the day. But I'll hang out for like 7 more minutes, see if there's any questions specifically that relate to me. I'm going to scan this really quick. Okay, Catherine, Influence Sauna is out of stock right now. Yeah, probably a lot of shipping and factory issues with all the COVID shutdowns and whatnot. Probably true for a lot of different sauna companies. Christine, Ari, do you have any thoughts about Sunlighten's Lumi near infrared wand handheld device? Would it be comparable to the red light flashlight you mentioned in the last Q&A? Yeah, so they actually sent me one a while back. And to be honest, I like Sunlighten. I know the owners of their company. I think they make good quality products in general. However, I really, really did not like this product. It is just so incredibly low power that, in my view, it's almost worthless. Like, it's not a good place to spend your money if you're looking for red light therapy. It's really not. There are many reasons why I say that. The gist of it is, it's a device about like that big. In order to get even near the level of effective dose, you'd have to apply it directly to the skin, which means you're treating an area of your body that's like about this big, right? Just a few square inches. So if you want to do a treatment, like let's say you wanted to do a treatment for skin anti-aging on your whole face, in order to do an entire facial treatment with this device, it would literally take you probably 45 minutes to an hour to apply it for a proper amount of time on each parts of your face. Now, would you rather do that, or would you rather have a powerful LED panel that hits your whole face at once and accomplishes the same thing in 5 minutes? Like, makes a lot more sense to have the LED panel. That's the short answer. So, yeah, that I could go on a million other nuances there, but that's the quick version of it. I'm just gonna scan this for stuff for me. Catherine, what kind of schedule can we expect for having these Q&As posted in the Fat Loss Blueprint group. Should be the day after recording. Okay. Nice. Sheila said, "You guys are awesome. You're not satisfied with your program as is. You keep trying to improve it." She loves that, and she says, "Respect to you all." Thank you. Yeah, we absolutely are constantly working to improve things. I think the program's pretty freaking awesome already, but yeah, we're gonna make it better.
I want to expand on that one, Ari, because I had someone else in the group ask a question, kind of tongue in cheek. Sorry, I'm leaning on my desk. Tongue in cheek to myself and Brianna, saying, "How do you have so much time to answer all of these comments on Facebook?" And my response to them was basically along the lines of, well, it's thanks to all of you. And that goes for everyone listening to this right now. The beauty of this program is that we get to spend so much time one-on-one with each of you in the Blueprint group, and then like updating each of the lesson plans. We can dedicate our time to that because of you all, purchasing the program and spreading word of mouth about how amazing it is. And ultimately, it's kind of like one of those collective efforts where each of you invests a little amount and gets a ton back, because it's the collective investment of all of you that lets me then, take all this feedback that you have for me and be able to actually spend time updating the program. Because right now, my focus and Ari's focus and Brianna's focus is exclusively on this program. Like, it's not a program where we just launch it and we're like, all right, good luck. We're right there by your side doing it all. And I really think it's important for all of you to understand that it's thanks to you that we're able to do this. That small investment you made getting this program lets us give you back 100-fold in terms of the information and the time and everything. And the more, this I don't want it to sound like a sales pitch or anything, but I mean, the more friends that you tell about this program, the more we're able to continue to give back to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well said, my friend. So there's just a couple more questions here for me. Christine is commenting about my honesty about the Lumi near infrared. Yeah, I mean, hopefully, if you guys don't already know me, you should get used to that. The same is true for Alex and Brianna. I never let any connections with companies or affiliate relationships or anything like that influence the bottom line of my actual recommendations. I tell people the truth. To tell you very honestly, after I wrote my red light therapy book, I had one very prominent company, the most prominent red light company, reach out to me and threaten me for recommending other devices and ranking other devices ahead of theirs. And they made all kinds of accusations. They accused me of measuring things in an inaccurate way. They threatened to have a lawsuit against me because I was slandering them or misrepresenting them, and all sorts of things like that. And they threatened to take my affiliate relationship away with them. And I said, cool, do whatever you want. My recommendations are what they are. I did not misrepresent anything. These are 100% accurate measurements, and my rankings are according to objective criteria of power output and price. And on those criteria, your device is not the most superior. If you want to try and sue me over it or take away my affiliate relationship, do whatever you want. But I'm not changing my recommendations. And so that's the level of honesty and integrity that I operate at across the board. And I know the same is true of Alex and Brianna as well. We're not here to sell you on garbage. We're not here to lie to you and misrepresent for the sake of making money. We're here to help you, and we're here to provide the highest level of honesty and integrity in teaching you the science and helping you to get results. Christine said, what brand of larch tree fiber do you take? And if you have to run, no worries, take care of your kids. Yeah, I'm going to run in a second. Just a couple questions here. So the larch tree fiber brand that I get is, I think it's Swanson. And
that's what Brianna uses.
Okay. And there's two there's several different like patented versions of larch tree fiber, and some are patented for different reasons. So one is called Resist Aid, and one is like Immune Enhance or something like that. And there's another patented version of it as well that's more for gut microbiome rather than immunity. I think they're all good, to be honest with you. I think Swanson has both the Resist Aid, and they have a larch tree fiber that's a different patented extract that's more for gut microbiome health. But they're both good, and there are other brands as well that sell the same patented extract. So if you don't know kind of how the supplement industry works, basically there are manufacturers of like the specific ingredient, like a specific kind of patented larch tree extract. And then there are many different companies. So for example, Jarrow and Now Foods and Thorne and Life Extension and whatever other companies that you can think of, and the Energy Blueprint, right? I do the same thing. I go to those manufacturers and I source those specific ingredients from many different manufacturers, and I put those supplements in my formula. So if I go seek out Resist Aid and I get that patented form of larch tree fiber, that Resist Aid in my product is the same as the Resist Aid in Swanson, which is the same as the Resist Aid in Now Foods, and is the same as the Resist Aid in all the other ones, because we're all sourcing it from the same manufacturer. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, there was one other question here. Oh, here's one. Mary said, can you discuss the ingredients and the benefits of Energenesis? Yeah, let me link you to the best place to just have a full breakdown. I mean, I literally have a 45-minute presentation on this. So I'm just going to link you to the page where this is, and it's theenergyblueprint.com/energenesis-new. But there's a whole breakdown in text and in video on that page of all kinds of science behind all the different ingredients. There's over 20 ingredients, and there's like dozens of studies on each of those ingredients. So way too much to sort of try and cover in a 2-minute or 5-minute answer. But I just linked you to the page with a long text explanation and a long video that goes over all of that. And then last question here is, I saw, it looks like maybe it disappeared now, but I saw one from Jeremy, and he said that he couldn't find dosing recommendations for red light. And he read my book, but he couldn't find them. They are in the book, actually, Jeremy. So they're there, and they're also on my website. So if you do a search for Ultimate Guide to Red Light Therapy in Google, you'll for hair loss specifically, you're asking. So I would do hair loss the way that I would treat skin issues. So follow the dosing guidelines for skin issues. So something like somewhere between 6 to 12 inches away for probably 5 to 15 minutes on the area of your scalp. So that would be the best way I would do that one. So I think that's it for me, guys. I got to run. I got a barking dog and a crying kid. So I'm going to let Alex and Brianna take over.
Enjoy.
And, thanks, guys. You guys were awesome, by the way. And it was a pleasure, as always.
Always fun.
Yeah. Thanks for the questions, everyone. I'll see you on Saturday.
All right. Thalia asks, how do you support detoxification pathways while losing weight? Well, there's 3 things you can do. The first is reduce your exposure. So this is things like reducing your exposure to toxic chemicals that you could be using in like your shampoo, your body wash, your detergents, just like cleaning supplies, that type of thing. And it can also involve reducing your exposure to smog and air pollution or smoke. So, because you want less toxicants coming into your body. The other way, or the second way, is to support your liver. So taking very specific herbs and generally just eating a very plant and fiber-rich diet will help support your liver and its ability to detoxify the toxicants in your body. And the third way is going to be to support excretion of the toxicants. That's where fiber comes in. Fiber binds to bile. that is secreted by your liver, and that bile carries with it all of the, or not all, but many of the toxicants that the liver is trying to get rid of. And so the fiber prevents that bile from being reabsorbed into the bloodstream, which otherwise 95% of it would just be reabsorbed. So it's important to eat plenty of fiber. It's important to drink fluids, because the other way your body excretes toxicants is to urinate them out through your bladder. So lots of fiber, lots of water, and then sweating in things like saunas, because you will literally sweat out not just the metabolites that the liver has created from the toxicants, but also the toxicants themselves. You can sweat them out. So reduce exposure, support liver, and increase excretion. Those are going to be the 3 ways. Let's see. Carmen, can I get it to Mexico? Oh, I don't know what that's regarding. It sounds like a question for Ari. Mir, if you're trying to lose weight before getting pregnant, anything special to keep in mind? I know the liver is really good food. Do you know if there's a correlation between weight loss and pregnancy? So if you're already at a normal weight, then being underweight can reduce your chance of getting pregnant. It can impair fertility, but it can reduce egg quality.
Some things, if you're dieting before, if you're not like at a healthy weight and you want to lose some weight, I would take a multivitamin. Make sure that you're getting some methylfolate. Increase your antioxidants and watch your hormone levels. DHEA has been shown to increase egg quality, so I would look into that. Your practitioner can test that.
Yeah, so if you're overweight or obese, losing weight will generally improve fertility and improve pregnancy outcomes. If you're at a normal weight and you're trying to get leaner, that will have the opposite effect. Tina clarified for earlier when I was talking about sprouts that it was like broccoli sprouts, mung beans. Yeah, they aren't a good source of protein. Sheila, I looked up fibrous veggies, broccoli for sure, but what about carrots? And how about cauliflower? Yeah, so this is a term that I will clarify in the update for lesson number 2. And it basically refers to any non-starchy vegetable. So fibrous veggies are going to include broccoli, cauliflower, asparagus, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, salad greens, and other leafy greens, Swiss chard, kale, spinach, lettuce. There's like just such a long radishes. There's such a long list. Yeah, I would put carrots in there if you're just dealing with them in small amounts. But if you're like eating bags of carrots, then no, I would consider them a sugary root vegetable, similar to turnips. And then on the flip side, you have starchy roots, which are or starchy tubers, which are like potatoes and sweet potatoes. Rebecca, is Organics bone broth protein powder good? Well, it's a source of collagen. Bone broth protein is almost entirely collagen, so it's not a good source of protein in terms of making up the majority of protein in your diet. But as a source of collagen, it can serve that purpose. Collagen has benefits for the body, especially the skin, joint, and hair and nails, and bone health. But I wouldn't count it towards your protein requirements for the day. Rebecca, thoughts on chewing gum? It can actually be a great way to help with concentration and reducing appetite. But you know, for some people, it might make them crave certain sweet things, especially if it's flavored gum. So I think that would have an individual component.
Yeah, and it depends on your personality. If you're like me and you just keep putting piece after piece in your mouth, you need to consider all the artificial sweeteners they put in there, and there's other things to consider.
Sheila, do you have a favorite 0.5 milligram melatonin that is vegan? I can't find less than 3 milligrams online. I would rather start with the lowest unless you recommend otherwise.
The only ones that I've seen are extracts, like dropper bottles, and I can't guarantee that they're vegan.
Yeah, I don't have anything off the top of my head, but if you make a post in the Facebook group, we could search around a little bit and see if we find anything. Tamra, I'm thin and I have insulin resistance. My blood sugar goes high, 200 pretty easily. Calorie restriction isn't a good idea for me.
She commented up above and she said she was a vegan too. So I'm thinking she eats a lot of carbs.
Yeah, so I mean, it could be that you're just eating a very, very carb heavy diet, especially possibly one rich in sugar. And if so, that could help explain this.
Or not enough muscle mass.
The other part of it could be having low amounts of muscle mass from not eating sufficient protein, because muscle accounts for 80% of all glucose disposal after you eat. So if you have low muscle mass, then 80% of your glucose doesn't have a place to go as readily. And so that's why it spikes up as higher. But this is a tough question because of the personal fat threshold concept. So you might be saying that you are skinny and weight loss isn't good for you, and that could very well be true. But it's also possible that you have a very low personal fat threshold where even though you are skinny, perhaps you have high levels of visceral fat because you are carrying around too much fat even at your current weight than what your body is capable of carrying for health. And so there is a phenomenon where you see very skinny individuals that have type 2 diabetes, and that's because they have a low personal fat threshold. They do not need to gain very much fat in order for that fat to be diverted and stored inappropriately in their muscle, liver, and pancreas, causing the metabolic dysfunction that you're experiencing, like insulin resistance.
So it's just really important that you eat enough protein, build some muscle through resistance training, right?
Exactly. Build up that muscle tissue for metabolic health, and that could also help reduce the amount of visceral ectopic fat that you have going on too, if that ends up being a reason why. Let's see. Let's see. There's just a lot of comments to other people. Sheila, y'all are awesome. Not sass. Oh, Ari already read that. Thank you, though. Christine, is there a specific brand of spirulina that you prefer?
Hawaiian Pacifica, and that's because it's I've contacted the company and it doesn't have high heavy metals.
Christine, Alex, such great work ethics to want to update and constantly improve. Thank you so much. Oh, you're welcome. I enjoy what I do, so it doesn't even feel like work. Catherine, Miriam, you can buy towels that hold a lot of water to put around your neck to keep you cooler. Christine, is organic coconut water such as the pink harmless coconut water a good source of electrolytes? I feel better drinking it after the infrared sauna. Or do we need to be concerned about the sugar content?
That depends on your overall diet. Like I said earlier, I don't like drinking my calories, so that's something that I don't do. If you feel like it works in your diet, then I think it's fine. I think it's not too high sugar to worry about, and it's a great source of potassium.
Jessica, I never seem to be able to break a good sweat. Here in Michigan in the summer, I will get kind of sweaty, but usually I just sort of overheat. My face gets bright red, but it's bone dry. It always makes my efforts to try something like high intensity interval training miserable. I wonder what would happen if I used the sauna, but I've always been afraid to try. I'm 39, but this has been an issue for as long as I can remember. Do some people just not sweat, or is this pointing to a hormonal or metabolic issue? It could be both, but yeah, some people literally just do not sweat. They have a genetic condition where their sweating capacity is greatly reduced, and it leads to everything that you're describing about having heat intolerance and an inability to perform at high intensity exercises simply because you overheat so readily.
It could be thyroid dysfunction too. Low thyroid leads to not sweating as well, so I would check into that.
Yeah. Juanita, I have PCOS and hypothyroidism. Are there any tweaks on any of the protocols you suggest to do?
PCOS is a difficult one. I need more information because a lot of times it's misdiagnosed by doctors if you are athletic. because it looks the same on paper, but it's not the same. So if you could give me more information, I could help you out more with your personal situation.
Generally speaking, the recommendations would not be different, but to expand on what Brianna was saying, polycystic ovarian syndrome presents in a very similar hormonal pattern to women that are very lean and have hypothalamic amenorrhea. And so many women might just need to actually gain fat mass in order to resolve their condition. It's not that they actually have PCOS. And the fact that you also have hypothyroidism kind of plays into that, because if you're hypothalamic amenorrhea, then you're going to have low thyroid function. So we need to know your personal situation, Juanita. Are you very lean and athletic, or are you overweight? If you're overweight, then you probably do have PCOS and hypothyroidism. But if you're lean and athletic, then frankly, you probably just need to gain some weight, as much as you might hate hearing that. Joni, am I understanding this properly? I weigh 184 pounds. That's about 83 kilograms. So my protein needs are 83 times 1.2 or 1.6 as a sedentary senior. How do I ever get that much protein in? Yeah, great question, Joni. And a lot of people who have been habitually eating a low amount of protein struggle to eat an adequate amount. I can't tell you how you personally can get that much protein in. What I can say is that two things that I find generally help people is the first is to eat protein as the first aspect of their meal, so that when they start getting full, they're still getting their protein in. And the second one is to take advantage of protein powders and either mix them in foods or have a protein shake. Lori, thank you, Alex, for the clarification on intermittent fasting. And yes, I love the idea of fat loss while building muscle, but the strength and stamina is more important to me. Yeah, so in that case, Lori, I would say just focus on the lifestyle and dietary habits we lay out, but be sure to eat enough to prevent the fat loss, because these recommendations will help your body recomp otherwise. Suzanne, always such great information. I am grateful to have a female perspective alongside Brianna. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maria, I'm excited to be again in the first steps of a program and to see the growth within it. Awesome. So happy to hear that. We're excited to have you. Let's see. Christine, Brianna, do you supplement with vitamin E for hormone support, or do you prefer to get sufficient amounts of vitamin E from food?
From food, because I have a certain genetic polymorphism that makes my risk of certain disease states higher with supplemental vitamin E. So it's really individual. I had access to genetic testing, and so I know that about my personal situation. I think food first is always a great idea, and then supplement if you can't do food.
Yeah, I think it's also important to point out that most vitamin E supplements are one of 8 vitamin E isomers, alpha tocopherol. Alpha tocopherol is the only isomer that has antioxidant vitamin, or not antioxidant, but satisfies our vitamin E requirements in the body. However, the other forms, although they are not essential, they play very important roles in maintaining vitamin E overall balance and antioxidant and anti-cancer activities within the body. And so I think that food generally provides all 8 vitamins, as opposed to just one, which you find in supplements.
Yeah, and I obtain my vitamin E through nuts.
Yeah. Almonds and hazelnuts, also called filberts, are a great source, and so are sunflower and pumpkin seeds. Sheila, I found pure formulas in 0.5 milligram melatonin, which is a veggie capsule. Awesome. Well, great. Jeremy, Brianna, what type of vitamin A is supposed to help with dry skin? Any other ideas to help with dry skin?
Retinol is what I use, pure encapsulations. For dry skin, it depends on what's going on. Are you eating enough fat in your diet? Because that's necessary to absorb the fat soluble vitamins. Are you just dry because you're out in the sun all the time? Then a moisturizer will help. So if you tell me about what like is causing the dry skin, or if you don't know, then say that too. I can help a little more.
Mary, thoughts on this product? Sane Solutions Cashew Bar. 240 calories, 10 grams of fat, 20 grams of protein, 2 grams of sugar, and 12 grams of fiber. Been using it as an additional protein. You know, from a purely macronutrient standpoint, I think the bar looks fine. It has a good amount of fiber. It has a great amount of protein, and it's low in sugar. So if it works for you as an additional source of protein, then I say keep on using it. Do you have any thoughts, Brian?
Nope.
All right. So Juanita, I'm 100% sure I have PCOS, clinically diagnosed since I was in my 20s. I'm not extremely overweight. I only want to lose like 8 pounds, but I do have a tendency to gain weight easily.
Okay, so my first thought is that if you only have 8 pounds to lose, then PCOS can present, like you will be clinically diagnosed with PCOS because a lot of doctors don't deal with athletic women. So that's what I meant, where you will be diagnosed, but it's incorrect. And the scientific literature supports that. So a lot of doctors don't deal with people that are athletic. They deal with the general population. So that's why they just see the same values, like your testosterone will be high, like your hormones are off. And so it shows a pattern and they just code it as PCOS, right? But if you are overweight, then the solution is losing fat. Like that's just what you do. But if you have only 8 pounds to lose, I'm wondering if you're leaner than you think you are.
Yeah, beautifully said. And again, everything in this program would apply similarly to someone in your situation than someone who didn't have polycystic ovarian syndrome.
The cause of it is usually being overfat.
Yes, the cause is usually being overfat. Gina, have you guys been standing this whole time? Yeah, we have. We use standing workstations. And so, yes, we have been standing here the whole time. That's why you keep seeing me lean forward like this on the desk, is because I'm starting to get lazy. Juanita, I'm unsure if intermittent fasting helps me because of this thyroid and hypothalamus, or the quantity of carbs I should get, or how I should do my or if I should set up carb cycling. You know, Juanita, I think that with your situation, the best route of action is going to be making a post of it in Facebook if you're part of the Facebook group, because it sounds like you're just trying to get things figured out for you in particular, and it's going to be easiest for us to have a back and forth with you, like a conversation, and get more information and help set something up for you in a Facebook post. And I'm sure that there's other people in the group that are probably in a similar situation as you, so then they can benefit from the discussion too, and maybe they'll have input.
Yeah, it would be helpful if you in that post, if you put your thyroid values, your last test, like what it showed, and if you're medicated too.
Joni, for about 20 years, I've been telling the doctor I don't burn fat. I can't exercise much due to bad knees, so what can I do? Lower my fat intake and do strength training? Any other ideas of why this is happening or what I can do? Well, Joni, I don't know what you mean by how you don't burn fat, because if that was the case, there are rare genetic conditions that lead to that. It also involves being unable to fast at all, not even overnight. So if you're able to make it through the night, then you're able to burn fat.
Usually people don't make it past childhood without being diagnosed with some form of disease like that, because they black out and it's really nasty.
Yeah, exactly. So I empathize with your inability to exercise. That really sucks, and I totally get why that could be discouraging. You say you have bad knees, so that means you do still have an upper body that you can train. There are also knee-friendly exercises. I don't know if you purchased a Strength Blueprint. If you did, then I would definitely comment in the Strength Blueprint group and tag Alex Viada and get some input on what type of strength training you could do with bad knees. As far as just general ideas on your situation, I think you can burn fat. And I think it's just going to take working with you to figure out how much you're eating right now and what are some tricks that we can use to help either reduce how much you're eating or increase your energy expenditure without the need for a lot of exercise.
Yeah, and you're asking if you should lower your fat too. I mean, that's a great thing to cut out of your diet first. It's easy to overeat because the volume is so low. So
yeah, but again, that's going to be a hard recommendation to give without knowing what you're eating currently. So let's start there. Maybe make a post in the Facebook group. Give us an idea of what you're currently eating in terms of like foods and macronutrients. If you know that, some people track their food in like chronometers. So, but let's just start with that and let's go from there. Jeremy, is whey protein isolate the best protein for muscle synthesis? Are there certain types of protein powders that are best for muscle synthesis? How about protein powders to avoid / lower quality? So all protein powders are pretty much similar. An argument could be made that whey protein is the most superior protein powder based on amino acid quality. But once you consume enough protein, this difference doesn't matter. And our goal is to get everyone to consume enough protein. So I don't think it matters. Whey protein, egg protein, soy protein, pea protein, whatever. I think it's just all the same. It's just about picking one that you can use and going with it. I personally use whey protein isolate. But Brianna loves her Sun Warrior vegan protein powder. So just pick one. Thalia, thank you. Brian and Alex, super helpful. We're glad to help. Christine, I've heard that Nestle bought out Pure Encapsulations. Have you heard the same? And would it change their ingredients and quality? If so, I really like their products. I just ordered the vitamin A. Yeah, so we have heard about that, and we aren't worried about it because two reasons. First of all, Pure Encapsulate, Pepsi is in the business, or Nestle, sorry, not Pepsi. Nestle owns Pepsi. Nestle's in the business of making money. The reason they bought Pure Encapsulations is because they are appealing to a market that Nestle does not have any foothold in, because Pure Encapsulations appeals to people that are more health conscious.
And that's growing every year. And
that market is growing. Nestle isn't going to mess with that because they want to make money, and Pure Encapsulations is making money. That's why they bought them out. So I have no concerns that they're...
processing is still all the same. I've contacted them.
Yeah. So the heads of Pure Encapsulations still work there. They're still running the show. It's just that now they have Nestle as kind of their parent company.
So, I mean, this is an ethical question. If you have personally have an issue with supporting big corporations, then that's a choice you have to make for yourself. But I don't think the quality is any different. So,
yeah. Jeremy, I eat plenty of healthy fat like avocado, coconut, and extra virgin olive oil. Main areas of dry skin are my scalp and intermittent face dryness. It varies during the time of year. Being in the sun actually helps make my skin less dry.
Okay, so what I would do is use a moisturizer then. If being in the sun makes it less dry, then it could just be issue with your sebaceous glands, right? Because you're sweating more and you're getting the oil you need. So it could be that. Sounds like your healthy fats are great. When we increase our vitamin D from the sun, we need more vitamin A. So I would still keep up with the vitamin A.
Yeah. Juanita. Okay, will do. Thank you. Christine, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Well, thank you for listening. Jeremy, Do you use a standing workstation all day, or do you sit occasionally during the day to give your feet a rest? What brand of standing workstation do you have or recommend?
Alex stands all day. I sit more than him. We both have Upwork desks. That's our favorite brand.
I sit
Very
rarely, but like it's not that bad. Like so my thing is I have a treadmill also, and so if I am standing here and I start to like get antsy or my posture breaks, but I still have work I need to do, then I'll just start walking on the treadmill because that'll like perk me back up. But yeah, I don't sit much unless I have to drive somewhere or I'm sleeping. Rosa, what brand of collagen protein do you recommend? I personally like Great Lakes collagen because I find that's the most affordable. I think they have really high ethical standards. They only source from pasture-raised cows that are grazed in the Andes mountains, and they test all of their batches of collagen for contaminants like pesticides and heavy metals, and they're very transparent about all of that. And so I think they're amazing. Another really good brand is what's it called? Vital Choice?
Yeah.
Vital Choice Collagen is another great brand.
Vital Proteins.
Vital Proteins. Christine, Brianna, what brand of heat waist belt do you use that Ari was referring to?
I just went and looked for you. It's the Shaper RX, and I just got it on Amazon. I like that one the best because the popular one stretches out really easy, and you can only use it for a couple months and then have to buy another one. This one, it has multiple like Velcro things, so you can use it for a lot longer.
Christine, thanks for the answer about Pure Encapsulations. That's terrific that you contacted them directly to ask.
We're a little obsessive.
Yeah, we are. Lori, if I'm wanting more guidance in my quandary of feeling the need to reduce fat, especially in your torso and visceral area while gaining strength, should I post in the Fat Loss Blueprint Facebook group? Yeah, you should, Lori, because these Q&As are great for like answering questions in general, but for very specific kind of like one-on-one talk that goes beyond just answering a single question, it's always going to be better to post into the group. I know there is a belief that a person cannot shed fat while building muscle, but I want to. Not bulking, but rebuilding atrophied muscle. Is this even possible to do both? I know Brianna talked about having atrophied muscle, but she was very likely very trim while building. I need more help in this, especially with my traumatic brain injury. Yeah, it's completely possible. 100%. And there's numerous studies showing it. Studies showing that, especially with resistance training, people put on pounds of muscle while eating in a 40% calorie deficit every day. It gets more like for me, I probably couldn't build much muscle while dieting because I'm already at a very high level of muscle, and the effect kind of weans off once you get up there. But for somebody who's just starting out or who's recovering from something like your situation, then yeah, muscle growth tends to be amplified regardless of your calorie intake.
Yeah, I was referring to my cancer recovery too, after being like stuck in bed for most of a year. So I would put it in the same situation as you. Like I had to rebuild just like that. So
Ellen, great Q&A. Thanks so much for the content. There are a lot of recommendations, and I was wondering if you can put these in writing somewhere. Well, to be honest with you, Ellen, I don't remember what a lot of the recommendations are other than like the collagen we just talked about. But if you remember what you want recommendations on and you make a post about it, then I can link you directly to the stuff in the Facebook group. And, you know, for a lot of these things, I think too, I've given links out previously. So if you also just search for like what you're interested in, like collagen, I guarantee you'll find me linking to something. Christine, do you both prefer to front load calories in the morning as talked about in the Fat Loss Blueprint? If so, what's an example of your first meal? No, actually, we don't. And this is something that is individual. So in the Fat Loss Blueprint, we talk about front loading calories as being a theoretical ideal for both of us, we find that theoretical ideal doesn't pan out. We both prefer to have most of our calories later in the day because we like to feel lighter throughout the morning, and we sleep better with most of our calories at night. And part of that has to do with just both of us being already relatively lean. Generally speaking, we find that the leaner someone is, the better they do with calories more towards sleep, especially when they're dieting. And if someone has more weight to lose, then they do better with it in the morning because it gives them energy to function throughout the day, and it helps suppress their appetite for the rest of the day. But again, individual differences are always going to win out. Kathy, hello. I purchased the program with the exercises, but I have a pelvic dysfunction and prolapse and can't do all of the exercises. Could they be modified for this issue? And if you can tell me which ones are safe to do with prolapse, I need to build muscles and strengthen the core as I've lost quite some muscles with weight loss, even though I was doing intermittent fasting. Kathy, so this is going to be an ideal question for Alex Viada, who created the exercise program. And there's a separate, if you look at the strength blueprint, just like you found a Facebook group for the fat loss blueprint, there's one for the strength blueprint. And so what I would do is I would join that group and then ask this type of question in there because he's the exercise expert. I think before that group got turned into its own group, I think he answered like 1 or 2 questions on this exact issue of a prolapse. And in the fat loss blueprint group. So if you use those terms and search for it in the group itself, then you might be able to find something helpful. But otherwise, definitely join the strength blueprint group and ask there. Lori, Brian, and Alex, thank you. That gives me more confidence and validation that my belief that I could shed fat and build muscle at the same time is true. So grateful for this answer. Yeah, well, I mean, it's the truth. So, don't be grateful to us for telling you that the sun rises and sets every day. But no, seriously, we're glad that we can help. That's why we do these calls. And that was the very last one. So, we'll give a minute. Does anyone have any final questions that they want to ask? Otherwise, we're going to end this thing. So we'll give you a minute to type out anything that you want to say before we end things. Christine, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Well, we appreciate you listening. Lori, I've said it for years with pushback. So grateful. Well, we're glad to hear it, Lori. And, Christine, you deserve your dinner. Hope we didn't keep you. It's fine. It's part of the job. It's part of the job. So, yeah, we are going to eat after this. Mary, you guys are awesome. Thank you, Mary. You're awesome, too. Christy, if I'm a vegan, how do I eat nuts if nuts are mostly fat and all my other proteins are mostly carbs? Christy, yeah, that's a tough one. Here's the problem with vegan diets. To be completely honest with you, and I'm sure many others listening right now that are eating vegan diets and following Brightline Eating will agree with me on this. Biggest difficulty is getting sufficient protein, because every single whole food source of vegan protein comes with either a bunch of carbs or a bunch of fat, and in all cases, a bunch of calories. I really do strongly advise you to find a vegan protein powder that you would enjoy and tolerate, and to integrate that into your diet as the primary source of protein. Because everything about a vegan diet's great, except for the protein content. But that's easy to overcome thanks to modern advances in food processing. Protein powders have literally made one of the biggest difficulties of a vegan diet effortless. All you have to do is use a protein powder. So that's my recommendation. Rebecca, thanks. So grateful. We're grateful that you were able to listen through to the end. Terry, thank you. Jeremy, Alex, what whey protein isolate do you use? Where do you buy it? I use Now Sports whey protein isolate, and I buy it off Amazon. Thalia, can you please tell me more about the Heat Waist Belt? Is the brand Shaper RX belt?
Yeah, that's what it is. If you still can't find it, tag me in the group and I can link you.
Christy, thank you. You're welcome, Christy. Jenny, never got a separate link for the Strength Facebook group. Yeah, if you log in to the Energy Blueprint website and you do the login, that brings you to the kind of that like dashboard page where you get to click on like Energy Blueprint, Fat Loss Blueprint, Strength Blueprint. If you click on the Strength Blueprint and you enter into the module, there should be a link near the top that says join our Facebook community. Julian, are you familiar with the vitamin brand ProCaps Labs, and any opinions if so? Are you familiar? No, neither of us are familiar. But if you have a specific supplement that you would like us to evaluate, post a link to it in the Facebook group and we'll take a look. I'm very good at looking at the ingredients and letting you know if, first of all, it's like a clinically effective supplement, and second of all, taking that into consideration along with the price. Lori, Alex, did you see that I said the Sun Warrior Blend Classic Plus has no coconut, only the Classic does? Oh, well, that's good to know. I will actually have to go check it out and see exactly what's in it then, because that would be very helpful for people. Thank you. And I think that we are coming to an end. Okay, well, everyone, thank you so much for listening and sticking through this just over 3-hour session. I hope you got a lot out of it. I enjoyed it. I love talking with all of you and talking with Ari and talking with my beautiful wife about everything. So we're going to go enjoy dinner now, and I hope that all of you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for joining us.